Welcome to the Bothell City Council meeting of June 18th, 2019. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All council members are here. Meeting agenda approval. Is there any changes to tonight's meeting agenda? We're good. Public engagement opportunities. There we go. Oh, great. Let's see. Take our community survey for the pros plan, available now through August at our website. The King County Library System's summer reading program begins June 1st. Check out Bothell Library for more information on programs and events scheduled throughout the summer. Bothell Library, Thursday, June 20th, 7 p.m., first in a 4-part series on historical Bothell transportation presented by Bothell Historical Society. Bothell was a river city and relied on the Sammamish River to travel, learn from local experts what made Bothell unique. The Waste Mobile will be Friday, June 21st to Sunday, June 23rd from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Seattle Times building. Disposes of your household hazardous waste. See our website for more information. Do they take paint? They taking paint? I'm looking at the city manager. Like, anyways, Orca to go kiosk at City Hall Thursday, June 27th, 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. Get an Orca card, replace lost or stolen cards, add value to an existing card, or just get your questions about the program services answered. The kiosk will be open on the second and fourth Thursday of each month. Okay, with that, oh, we have a proclamation. I'll come down to the podium. Is anybody here from Steve's Café? No?
Mr. Mayor, they weren't able to make it,
Okay.
But I thought if you could present it, and then I would bring it to them at their open house that's being held for the last day of the closing of the restaurant, and I would personally give it to them.
Okay, good. Steve's Café. Whereas Steve's Café opened its doors on Main Street on August 1997 and became part of the fabric of Bothell's downtown core, and whereas Steve and Marlene and their staff have provided a gathering place for the community and served countless customers, treating each as a neighbor and friend, and whereas Steve's Café has been a mainstay for city employees, Bothell residents, and visitors visitors for hearty home-style breakfast and lunch favorites. And whereas Steve's Café contributed to the economy and success of Main Street for over 20 years, and whereas Steve's Café will close its doors on June 22nd in order for Steve and Marlene to embark on their next adventure. Now, therefore, I, Andrew Rame, the Mayor of the City of Bothell, do hereby recognize Steve and Marlene Hoffer for their contribution to the city and wish them well in their retirement. All right, next on the agenda is special presentation, Recology's annual update. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Emily Warnock, Sustainability Assistant, and I would like to introduce Quinn Apuzzo from Recology, who will be presenting their annual update.
Thanks, Emily. All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council, and thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule for us to come out and provide an update of Recology's services in the city of Bothell over the past year. My name is Quinn Apuzzo. I am the new Government and Community Affairs Manager with Recology, and before I dive right into it, I just briefly wanted to introduce myself to you. While new in this role, I'm not new to Recology. I've been with the company for about the past 10 years in a variety of different capacities, mostly related to public education and outreach and program and project management. I was part of the 2015 team that partnered closely with the city on the implementation of our contract. So I'm fairly familiar with your community, and I've had a chance to work with your fantastic staff over the past 5 years. So with that, I will dive right into it. Is this? Okay. All right. So this is our agenda for this evening. Please feel free to stop me and ask questions along the way. We will have time for Q&A, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any in line. All right. Before we dive into the meat of the presentation, I wanted to provide a little bit of a background in terms of who Recology is and what we do here locally and regionally. So Recology is a 100% employee-owned resource recovery company. I'll take a little bit of time here because I think these are really, really important things and align closely with the city in terms of the services we provide. So we're 100% employee-owned. This is really significant in terms of how we provide service. Everyone from our CEO down to our most junior driver is an owner. The way that works is that the value of the company is distributed to our employees on an annual basis in the form of a supplemental retirement plan. And again, we do that because we think that when you're an owner, you act like an owner, and that really translates into the quality of the service we provide. So as a resource recovery company, we're really defining ourselves differently than a traditional garbage company. And what we mean when we talk about resource recovery is we're dedicated to recovering waste resources and putting them back to their best and highest use. And in light of that, Recology really puts our money where our mouth is. We, unlike kind of traditional garbage companies, we are very minimally invested in landfills, but heavily invested in recycling and composting facilities. We're West Coast based. We're headquartered in San Francisco, and up and down the West Coast, we own and operate 21 recycling and composting facilities and only 3 landfills. Here in Bothell, we provide collection services. This is the kind of the bread and butter. This is the majority of the work we do. We serve just over 9,000 residential customers and about 600 commercial and multifamily customers. In addition to collection services, we also provide a complementary line of business that we call streetscapes, where we provide things like pressure washing and graffiti removal and litter collection. And then last but not least, we do extensive public education outreach, and we also own and operate the Recology store in Canyon Park, which I'll talk more about both of those things in just a moment. All right, so as I mentioned, kind of our bread and butter, the majority of the work we do is we come to your home or your business and we pick up your garbage, recycling, and composting. For residential customers in the city of Bothell, that happens on a weekly basis for all 3 services. For commercial and multifamily customers, we provide the same services, just on a schedule that meets the needs of the business or the multifamily property. And when we are evaluating our success or how we're doing with providing these services, there's one key metric that we look at, and that's a fairly industry standard. And that's what we refer to as our collection rate. And what this is really telling us is how often do we miss picking up your garbage or your recycling or composting. So in 2018, we achieved in the city of Bothell a collection success rate of 99.9% accuracy. In other words, we missed 0.09 pickups per 1,000 collections. Or another way to think about that is we missed 1 customer per 1,000 collections. So it's a pretty good accuracy rate. That's well below the contract required threshold and very low for industry standards. All right, so the collection rate closely ties to customer service. At Recology, when we're talking about customer service, we have a philosophy that we throw around a lot, and I think it kind of embodies that. We like to say that we make our own calls. And what we mean by that is that if we're coming to your home or your business, picking up on time, on schedule, then you really shouldn't have too many reasons to give us a call. In 2018, we received about 12,000 customer contacts, so about 1,000 contacts per month. That's a combined total of calls and emails. And as we mentioned, our collection accuracy rate is quite high. So the majority of those calls are related to customers setting up a new service, asking questions about what can be recycled or composted, paying a bill, that kind of thing. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, when customers did call, did have a reason to call us, in 2018, we achieved an average call to answer time of about 10 seconds or less. So folks weren't waiting on the phone when they didn't have a reason to give us a call. All right, waste diversion. This is another key metric that we pay a lot of attention to and spend a lot of time talking about and focusing on. And what this metric is telling us is how good are we at recycling and composting? How much waste are we keeping out of the landfill? Last year, the city of Bothell diverted about 14,000 tons of material from the landfill through the city's recycling and composting programs. That was about 50% of all of the waste that was generated in the city, so we're doing pretty well in that regard. As you can see from the slide, that's a blended rate. The residential sector tends to lead in terms of diversion, and that's fairly consistent throughout King County communities and really with any commingled recycling programs. The commercial and multifamily sectors tend to lag with their diversion rates. And I'll talk a bit in a moment about what we're doing to try to help bring those numbers up. All right, so the diversion rate, again, that's kind of the key metric we look at when we're evaluating our recycling and composting programs, but it doesn't include the full scope of recycling activities and efforts underway in the city of Bothell. Has anyone here ever been to the Recology store? Ah, awesome. All right, next slide. Just kidding. So as you're probably familiar with, but for those of you who aren't, let me give a little background on what the store does and how it helps support the recycling and diversion efforts here in the city. So the Recology store has 4 primary functions. The first of which is basically it's an in-person customer service center. So residents can come in, pay their bills, receive all the same customer service support that they would receive if they called us, but just in an in-person fashion. The second function is it's a store. We sell products there, but we're very intentional and very specific about featuring products that are either made from recycled materials or designed with the intent to displace landfill waste. So we're trying to do some education in the products that we're selling. We're trying to close that loop when we're talking about recycling. And so those are the type of items that you'll see when you come to visit us at our store. The third function of the retail stores, and as it relates to diversion, is the stores they function as a drop-off recycling center. So you can bring a list of about 10 different hard-to-recycle materials to our stores, things like styrofoam, electronics, CFL tubes and bulbs. There's a number of other ones, and they're all listed on our website and up here, and drop those off. And what people ask us a lot of questions about is, they're like, why can't I put these materials in my blue bin? And that's a great question. When it comes to recycling these type of items, they can be recycled, but when you put them in their blue bin, they're not compatible with a collection or processing system that happens after the fact. But when we can collect them at the retail store, we can aggregate them separately and make sure that they reach an appropriate end market where they can actually be recycled. I want to share two anecdotes about the successes of the store recycling program, because this has been fantastic with the community getting on board with what we're doing there. And last year, the Bothell community brought and recycled over 100,000 gallons of styrofoam to the retail store. There were days we were literally swimming in styrofoam, and that styrofoam that ended up not going to the landfill through this program. So we're really, really excited about that. The second thing I want to talk about is paint. Last year we started a paint recycling program at all of our retail store locations, and the Bothell store was by far the biggest success. We collected over 18,000 gallons of latex paint. We partnered with an organization called Green Sheen. They collect the paint and remanufacture it, and will soon be selling it locally. So those were some great success stories. The fourth function of the retail stores is they act as community gathering spaces. So throughout the year, we host a series of events. Last year, last year we hosted quarterly waste reduction and recycling workshops. We did a green cleaning event, a zero waste lunch event. We had a fall green craft event, and this is a program that we're continuing this year. We had about 70 Bothell residents come join us for those events, and they were very well received. I won't take too much time here, but just want to briefly mention that that we at Recology really see ourselves as a community partner. We spend or we invest significantly in terms of financial and in-kind contributions to local organizations and regional groups. I love this picture. We like to partner closely with the events and organizations that we help support. This is from last 4th of July's Pancake Feed, where we worked with Sabrina and her team to host a zero waste event, and we always try to get a kind of a teachable moment in there, and here we're using the syrup bottles to demonstrate the oft asked question of how clean is clean when it comes to my recyclables. So that was a lot of fun for us. So I talked a little bit how commercial and multifamily sectors have lower diversion rates than what we'd like to see. So last year, we piloted a new program for the multifamily sector that we call WasteWise, and that program really began and was informed by the community. We partnered with the city to conduct a focus group where we gathered feedback from the community in terms of what barriers exist to succeeding with recycling, what resources would be helpful in terms of overcoming those barriers, and we used that feedback to design a program that could be easily customized and tailored to the multifamily properties that we were working with. I won't go too much into the detail of the program, but we provided resources which you can see up here. There's a bag for collecting your recyclables, a container for collecting your compostables, just to help make it easier. And then we paired these resources with a couple of different in-person outreach tactics and strategies. At some properties we did door-to-door outreach, at some properties we did presentations. It was really dependent on what the individual properties were interested in having us do and how they thought we could best engage with their residents. We worked with 5 different properties, and on average, we saw a diversion increase about 20% over the course of the 3 or 4 months that we were interacting with those sites. We did pre- and post-intervention baseline studies to make sure we were capturing some good data to be able to make decisions on how to adjust the program moving forward. One of the things I think was most exciting about this program was that at 4 out of the 5 properties, they previously weren't participating in compost collection service, and 4 of those properties added that service and have been successful with that program moving forward. And composting in multifamily is a big challenge, so we were really, really excited about that. On the commercial side of things, we conducted door-to-door canvassing of approximately 70 commercial businesses, and we really had 2 goals in mind in this outreach. The first of which was we wanted to make sure that Bothell businesses knew about the services that we're offering. They know that recycling is embedded. They know that food and yard waste is a lower cost service than their garbage. And we distributed these postcards really trying to illustrate the point that there's an economic benefit to being a good recycler and composter. The more you can recycle and compost, in theory, the smaller your garbage can be. So we tried to share that message, as well as letting businesses know that we're here as a resource. We have staff that can come out and help with trainings. We have signage. We've got a number of tools that are ready and available for businesses. They just need to let us know that they could use our help. All right. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this past winter's inclement weather event. Although it didn't happen in 2018, I felt it was worth bringing up here, in large part because it was significant for our region, but also there were some really great lessons learned and things that I think we can carry forward. Knock on wood, hopefully this doesn't happen again, but should it, I wanted to share what worked and where, what our response was. So, we hadn't seen a 2-week inclement weather event like that before. So we really, we had plans around it, but we hadn't tested them. And I have to give the City of Bothell staff a huge shout out for working super closely with us on communications. We realized really quickly that while we couldn't control the weather, we could control how we were communicating with customers to try to minimize the impact of service interruptions on them. So we leveraged social media. We sent out about 9,000 robocalls informing customers of service delays. We had updates on our website. We were really just trying to get the word out there, and I think it worked. One of the things we did early on was when we realized that this weather was probably going to continue past the 1-week mark, was we partnered with the city to get a drop-off collection station at Pop Keeney Stadium because we knew people were going to have a lot of, people were starting to accumulate waste and they were starting to get really anxious about it. And so we had just under 700 residents come during that 2-week period. They could drop off their material. The communications really helped let folks know that if you were impacted by this, here's one thing you can do to help kind of alleviate the accumulation. And we got so much feedback from Bothell residents that they really appreciated just having something they could do with that waste while we were getting back on the road and resuming normal service. All right, looking ahead. As much as I hate to end on a not a negative note, but just on a conversation about a little bit of a challenge and an opportunity really that we're facing in the recycling industry, I want to bring up a situation that's been getting some media coverage recently because of the impacts it's having on regional recycling programs and really nationwide recycling programs. So for those of you who may not be familiar, in late 2017, early 2018, China sent notice to the World Trade Organization that they would no longer be accepting a list of 24 recycled materials. They enacted that new regulation in very short order, and virtually overnight, 50% of the world's end market for recycled material went away. That's what China was. They were consuming about 50% of all the recycled materials produced in North America. So if you go back to your Economics 101 classes, when demand remains the same, but when the demand is cut in half, but supply remains the same, what happens is the revenue we were able to generate from the sale of recycled commodity tanked. This chart here shows what happened to mixed paper, which is significant because it's about 80% of what's in your blue bin is fiber, is paper. So over the course of a year, the price for mixed paper decreased by about 98%. And this is important because the revenue that's generated from the sale of recycled materials largely goes to help subsidize and pay for recycling programs. It helps pay for the trucks and the drivers and the outreach staff. So when that situation was upended, it really changes the economics of the system. So what has happened kind of regionally and locally, communities are responding in a number of different ways. Some communities have drastically cut back their recycling programs. Some communities have passed rate increases to pay for sustained recycling programs. Some communities are landfilling their recycled materials. That's not what Recology is doing. Recology is strongly committed. As I mentioned earlier, we're a recycling company. This is what we do. This is how we're structured. We're not going anywhere when it comes to recycling, but we are facing challenging times in terms of how do we make sure these programs are sustainable and viable for the long term. Some of the things Recology has done to date to try to mitigate this is we have slowed down and added new technology to help do a better job of sorting recycling, getting out the contaminated material, which was really kind of at the core of the issue here. And we've also started selling those recycled commodities to alternative end markets, because alternative end markets do exist, but not at the same revenue point that we were at previously. In some cases, we're actually paying now to recycle certain types of material. Again, this is an actively evolving situation. I know, members of the staff and mayor are all actively working on this, but just wanted to bring this up as a kind of timely topic and something that we as a region and industry are working through at present. And with that, I would love to open it up for questions.
Questions, Councilmember Zornes?
Well, first, can you give me an example of what an alternative end market might be?
Sure. So there are end markets in this primarily relates to mixed paper. So there are markets in Southeast Asia and India. There are some alternative markets in North America, and by North America I mean Canada.
Okay.
US, yeah.
So you're not talking about changing how they're recycling, like composting, or you're talking about just somebody specifically different who will be on the receiving end of what
Yes.
would be recycled in the same manner as it was before?
Correct. Yeah, the same
Gotcha.
kind of processing,
Okay.
but a different location.
Okay, so, and then the next questions are curiosity questions. Have you noticed fluorescence, a drop in fluorescence, or is it?
With the new bulbs that are on the market now?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Anecdotally, yes. I haven't seen data recently that would support that, but I could definitely look into that and let you know.
Okay. And then the other thing is, we have conversations at home. Evidently, there's a beetle that will digest styrofoam and thrive. Have you had any kind of conversations on that?
I have read some articles about that, but have not spoken with experts in that area.
So nobody's has started a styrofoam beetle-eating factory yet that you know
Not
of?
to my knowledge,
Okay.
but it's very interesting.
Okay.
And we're open to all solutions to this challenge.
Okay. And then my next question, because you were talking about, and my last question, we might need to bring planning in on this, is new construction, because, we're pushing the idea of multifamily.
Yes.
In new construction, is there any trend for these new buildings to accommodate and make easier recycling for the residents who live in these buildings? He's nodding his head, yes. I don't know. Is that coming in any of the planning? Okay, here we go.
Sorry. We did add a process in our permit checklist. So what happens is that when a new building is being planned, the plans are actually sent off to Recology or Waste Management for their staff to review them to see how tenants would be able to put those materials in and that the containers are available for that. So we have thought about that. That it also includes an analysis of the number of tenants and the available space for that as well.
Okay. I just, thinking back to my apartment days, I mean, the guilt would be a bigger drive than my laziness. But, I could see someone be tempted to say, no, I'm going to just, it's way down there at the end of the parking lot. I'll just put it all in the same bin.
The other thing we have, and Emily can actually hold one up, we brought one with us, but we have, as part of this new WasteWise program, we're issuing bags to the properties that are participating.
Okay.
So you get a food scrap pail as well as this great bag. And the bag allows you to carry down your recyclables, so it's easier to dump them out. It also has a handle on the bottom so that you can rinse it out and dry it out. So it's really helpful for tenants to use those when they sign up for the program.
Okay, you guys are on it. That is awesome. Thank you.
Councilmember McAuliffe?
Thank you. So, because I have two sons in the recycling business, and I see every day how they actually process everything, I have some questions about a couple of things. So, when you get cooking oil or electronics, or the other big one, I guess, is the styrofoam, how do you recycle? What happens to all this? Where does it go?
That's a great question. So we're the recycler, but we're not the end recycler for those materials. So we have partner organizations who are actually doing the recycling, kind of the remanufacturing of those materials into new cooking oil or new electronics or new products. So we work with an organization called ERI, Electronics Recycler International, and they're certified by all of the various agencies to do safe electronic recycling. And then with cooking oil, I believe it's going to a local vendor where they make fuel from that. Yes. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor, did you have questions? Oh, okay. So I get it. Yeah, no, we're good over here. So just out of curiosity, well, I just wanted to make one comment about the communications during the snow event were like awesome. I work with a different hauler at my normal daytime job, and we were like showing them example pictures of your website compared to theirs and be like, do this. So you guys did a really good job during the snow event. I got nothing for people complain typically when there's something, the service that isn't provided, and I literally got none.
That's great.
So yeah, that was huge. And then I just kind of want to speak to your company in general. Kevin Kelly, he'd meet me every year since we've had the contract, and he's just been awesome. And you guys have done a really good job. You're at every community event, and you're easy to work with the staff, as far as I know. So, and I probably would know if it wasn't okay. So thank you. You guys have done a great job. I'm glad we contracted with you.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, next on our agenda, we have I'm excited about this one, the special presentation about the Bothell Service Center electrical resistance heating treatment of contaminated soil.
These down here. Is it one of these? This is one of those.
Okay, and then
That's this
that one, and then double click, and then we gotta start your slideshow.
So should it be showing up there? Oh, okay. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm John Kane of Kane Environmental, and we're very pleased to be here this evening to present the results of the electrical resistance heating, or ERH system we call it, used at the Bothell Service Center Simon & Son site. But before we start, I would like to acknowledge the important role of the City of Bothell staff in this project. Under the guidance and leadership of City Manager Jennifer Phillips, city staff who have and continue to assist with us with this project include Aaron Lionheart, Eddie Lowe, Steve Morikawa, Duta Boothia, who in fact has been our lead contact with the city since I've been working on the project, Ryan Roberts and Paul Byrne. They all provided support and help in various stages of this project, and we really appreciate their assistance. This project was and continues to be a team effort, and between the technical team and the city staff, a sincere thank you to all the city staff. Some members of the Cascade Thermal subcontractor are here. Dr. Robert Danjou, Alan Swift, and Darla Smith are sitting here. And I would like to introduce Dr. Danjou of Cascade Thermal, who will, over the next 10 minutes, present the findings of the ERH system, and then we'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to present this to you. I'm glad to hear you're excited because I find this project very exciting as well. One kind of preface comment to kind of start this off is, right here in our backyard, we have a project that is driving the future of the remediation industry. It's caught the attention of the National Director of Technology for the United States EPA, Mr. Jim Cummings. It is a point of ongoing conversations on a national level with the Army Corps of Engineers. This project has become, in many ways, a shining example of the future of the environmental remediation industry in what we call combined in situ remedies. And this is combining multiple technologies and multiple approaches synergistically to improve the return on remedial investment, to reduce the timeline to completion, and to get rid of really complex or complicated sites in a very quick and efficient manner. A lot of drivers such as redevelopment, as we see here in Bothell, and stuff like that. It's really driving innovation and taking these traditional technologies and figuring out ingenuitive and creative ways to really make them more accessible and less costly. And so it's been a pleasure working with Kane Environmental and John Kane on this, and again, the city of Bothell. I think it's really cool that we have such a cool example of where the remediation industry is going right here, just around the corner from where we sit right now. So I was just going to give a really quick overview. We say this thing, in situ thermal remediation or electrical resistance heating, and a lot of people, their eyes glaze over and they say, what the heck is that, right? What does that really mean? And really, there's 3 heating technologies, but they all do basically the exact same thing. And this is taking a parcel of land, no matter what the volume is. We've worked on sites that are hundreds of thousands of cubic yards, so massive Superfund sites. And then we also have projects like this one where it's 6,000 cubic yards of actual subsurface that we bring, in this case, to the boiling point of water, so 100 degrees centigrade. As we're bringing that entire site to that boiling point, we're also sucking and vacuuming out all of these contaminant vapors and steam that we're generating. You're basically steam stripping and steam cleaning all of the contamination from the subsurface and then treating it above grade. It's really, it seems like a really foreign concept, but in actuality, when you get outside of all of the engineering, it's a really simple concept, right? So the main thermal remediation technology that we decided on for the source zone treatment at the Bothell Service Center project was electrical resistance heating. And this is kind of an interesting concept. So the way that we generate heat in the subsurface, the way that we actually bring that volume to that temperature is by passing electrical current through electrodes. And these electrodes are about 12 inches in diameter. And in the case of the Bothell Service Center, they went down to about 55 feet into the ground. And so, using kind of this really super computer electrical power distribution system, we isolate the electrodes so that there's no fear of stray current, and we flux a ton of electricity, so makeup of amperage and voltage, and the surface, the soil, actually resists the flow of that current, and that's what generates the heat. So the heat is actually being generated in situ inside the treatment volume. These electrodes are slotted and under vacuum, and so as they're generating the heat in the subsurface, they're also sucking all of this stuff that we're basically stripping out of the ground. The reason these technologies are so effective where a lot of other technologies fail is that we're not just removing the mass that's mobilized in that subsurface, which is what most technologies can get at, but we're actually desorbing mass off of the soil matrix. So we're basically forcing electrical current to cause chemically, at the atomic level, the compounds to come off and into the vapor phase where we can remove it. Really, really cool. This is a kind of conceptual model of what a system like this looks like, right? So we're taking power off the power grid and it's coming to a utility-owned transformer. From the transformer, it goes to our power distribution system. The power distribution system fluxes current in a very controlled manner to our electrode well field. Those electrodes are then causing that subsurface to go to that 100-degree C point that we're targeting. And in this little cartoon, that green, green blob that you see would be, in theory, your contamination. We're sucking that out of the ground, and then we're conveying it to an above-grade treatment system where we do, if it's GAC or if it's a thermal oxidizer on the end of it, it's basically a 99.9 something % destruction before you're actually discharging back to the atmosphere. So we're making sure that everything is clean before it goes back out into the atmosphere. And there's a lot of strict compliance with air quality permitting and stuff that we have to adhere to throughout the course of these projects. So I'm going to put some crazy big words up there, and don't worry about it. Basically, all of those are bugs. Those are different types of bugs that live in the subsurface that are known to eat contaminant species, right? They degrade them. This is their source of food. And so this is where I'm going to kind of start to combine the two concepts that we combined for this approach. So bioremediation is the concept of utilizing these microorganismal species, or bugs, to basically degrade the contaminant species in the ground. It's a really great process, but it takes a really long time. We're talking 5, 10, 15 years on natural conditions to remediate something with groundwater contamination similar to the Bothell Service Center. However, if we can take some of the residual heat energy from that thermal project and recirculate it through the much larger dissolved phase contaminant plume, we can actually accelerate the rate at which they are degrading those compounds. And you can kind of think about it like a petri dish, right? If you just have a culture on a petri dish at room temperature, it's going to take weeks for those cultures to grow. If you put it in an oven and you heat it up gently with the right nutrients, that colony flourishes, and all of a sudden you grow your cultures in a matter of hours. It's the same concept in the subsurface. So by taking the subsurface up to about 30 degrees C, we're creating this ideal environment for these bugs to not only increase their metabolism, increase their population size, but it makes them just go crazy, and they start eating these compounds a lot faster. So what does this mean, right? Thermal's really expensive. It's energy intensive, labor intensive, infrastructure intensive project, but it's super efficient, right? We can reach cleanup goals, as we'll see with this, of 99.999% reduction in contamination in the matter of months. But can you combine these two and find not only cost savings, but expedite the overall cleanup of a much larger area? And the answer is yes. So you're increasing your return on remedial investment, and you're reducing the time of completion so that you can redevelop or build on the land. So this is just an aerial photo. I'm sure you guys are all very familiar of where this is. The Bothell Library is right up there in the left-hand corner. And the green kind of circle there is the much larger dissolved phase plume. That's basically these contaminants, these chlorinated solvents that are in solution in groundwater that have dispersed over the years to create a much larger plume. What you see in the red box there is what we defined as our source zone. That's where the majority of the mass being held into the soil is located. In this case, we worked with John on doing kind of an advanced site characterization where we're able to really isolate down where that mass is being held in the subsurface. And we do this by these really cool three-dimensional models of the plume, and we get pretty accurate at defining what that looks like. So again, this is the much larger plume. Starting concentrations in soil were 35,000 milligrams per kilogram, or parts per million, very high concentrations. Our cleanup goal was 0.05 milligrams per kilogram. That's a 99.999% reduction in contamination in what we estimated would have been 160 days of actual runtime. So this is kind of showing us that three-dimensional EVS model that we came up with to define that 94% of the mass on this much larger site was being contained in that small area. And that's where we decided to put the thermal system and then use this biorecirculation system to get at that much larger dissolved phase plume. So this is an overall layout of the electrode field. It's kind of showing how it sits on the property. We ended up taking what was basically a 30,000 cubic yard plume and reducing the source zone down to about 5,000 cubic yards total. So a huge reduction in the amount of volume that we actually had to heat to get rid of that mass. Other kind of cool aspects of this project are, you can see on the side here, those are traffic rated well boxes. So we had installations in the subsurface where people can push babies in carriages and cars can drive over it, and it's absolutely safe. We've got about a decade of putting really good engineering controls in place to make sure there's no stray currents, there's no fugitive emissions, there's no issues whatsoever. We install these systems sometimes inside of active buildings like this, where a foot below your concrete slab, it's boiling water and contaminants being steamed out of the ground. So this is a pretty common application for us. And then you can see too the subsurface installation and trenching of the heat-enhanced biorecirculation system. that goes across the street and kind of, it's basically invisible to the naked eye. If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know that anything's going on. This is something I'm pretty proud of. I wrote an algorithm, a pretty advanced model and a pretty advanced algorithm. That black line is basically our projected temperature and heating curve, going from an ambient condition of about 18 degrees C all the way up to 100. And our red line is our actual heating curve for that site. Considering the complexities and everything that goes on in the subsurface, it just goes to show that we have a great deal of control over how we heat and how we approach that trajectory. I'm going to try to not get too nerdy here, and I'm going to say a big word, heteroazeotropic. What that actually means is that there's a boiling point at which these contaminants volatilize in the presence of groundwater. It's 87.9 degrees for PCE, which was the main contaminant of concern here. You can kind of see on this mass removal curve, the red line is our influent concentration, so how much of these contaminants we're pulling out of the ground, and the black is our heating curve. You can see that almost the moment we reached that 87.9 degrees C mark, we had mass just coming right out of the ground as we're sucking it out. So it just goes to show kind of some of the fun chemistry behind it and what to expect and when to expect it coming off at different temperatures. This is a really important aspect too, because we, working with Department of Ecology and Kane Environmental, one of the best ways to save money on a project and to be most efficient is knowing when to turn off the system, knowing when you have pulled all of the mass out of the ground. And that's a really tough thing, right? How do we know what's going on in the subsurface? How do we know that we're clean? And the idea is that we run these systems and very closely monitor the amount of concentrations that are coming in through the vapor phase. One fun thing with thermal that, unlike other technologies, is when we start to reach these asymptotic lower limit concentrations, it means that there's literally no more mass in the ground. So if we track that and we start to notice that trend of leveling off, we can say, yes, we have confidence, we can shut this off, we can reduce our electricity consumption, our utility bills, and we can move on to the next step of the project. So I think the biggest aspect of the thermal portion of this project is right there in big red letters. Pre-thermal soil sampling had an average PCE concentration of 3,504,000 parts per billion. Post-thermal soil sampling came back at 37.9 parts per billion. In 167 days of runtime, that's a 99.9989% reduction. Pretty incredible results. And so this is moving on to kind of the combined aspect of it, and I'll just kind of briefly go through these slides. You have your thermal system, and then you have a series of injection and extraction wells. The idea here is we're taking that hot water, that residual heat energy from the thermal system, and we're recirculating that along with electron donors to really make these bugs in the subsurface healthy, happy, and warm so that they're thriving. So the timing of starting that recirculation system, pulling that heat energy and dispersing it throughout the treatment area is basically taking the source zone and allowing it to help expedite the remediation process for that much larger dissolved phase plume. Again, typical biodegradation and monitored natural attenuation without doing this would probably be on the order of 5 to 7 years maybe, and this is most likely going to be completed for the dissolve phase. I think John estimate was between 1.5 years and 2 years total, right? 2 to 3. Okay, 2 to 3 total. But again, it cuts the timeline down between 2 and basically in half or a third of what it would have been otherwise, without really adding much infrastructure or much additional costs. So it's a really effective means of getting at these larger dissolved phase plumes. Again, this is just a cartoon, kind of the idea of it, right? We're taking the hot water out of the ERH source zone and recirculating it along throughout the much larger dissolved phase plume in order to stimulate the existing bug population. And that's really the concept behind this. And again, you know, This is now being used as a model for Army Corps of Engineer projects throughout the state of Washington and the country. There's several Superfund sites that have used the Bothell site as kind of a benchmark in this type of combined remedy approach. So again, very cool, and kind of, you know, congratulations to the city of Bothell for really endeavoring on such a cool and kind of cutting edge project that's really helping drive the remediation industry. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if they told us it was so cutting edge, but that's okay. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. That was fascinating. So do we know the estimated completion date?
John, do you? So the thermal system's done. That's been shut off for about 5 months now, I believe. And then I think the estimated completion date for the much larger groundwater cleanup is.
We're thinking 2 to 3 years, and then we have required compliance monitoring with the Department of Ecology as part of the consent decree.
Cool. Will you go up to the mic? I'm sorry, because we're recording this live, so.
Yeah, the 2 to 3 years for the bioremediation part, but as part of the consent decree, we have a requirement with ecology to continue compliance monitoring. All that means is just sampling probably about 20 wells about every 3 months, and might go on for another year or two after that. But that's our goal, and we'll be watching that as we go on, as we move forward. We're just turning the full system on now. We've had some of the wells turned on for the bio, but we had to wait in discussions with ecology to be able to turn on the entire full system, which will be happening here in the next week or so.
Great, thank you. So is this level of contamination unusual?
No, this is actually what I would say a smaller, I mean, depending on the, you know, I guess I'm biased in the thermal world. We usually get called in when it's incredible amounts of mass. For a project this size, it was very high concentrations, but because the actual treatment volume was smaller, it wasn't a large mass site. For instance, we just completed a project in Vietnam where we cleaned up over 1 million pounds of Agent Orange. I have an ongoing project right now in the Midwest where we're halfway through operations and we've pulled out 200,000 pounds of carbon tetrachloride and other really nasty contaminants. So we see sites all over the spectrum. This is, I'd probably say, small to mid-range project for us.
So, and you don't have to answer this if you're uncomfortable, but I would assume, since it's commonplace, that this wasn't caused by any illegal action on anyone's part, the contamination.
I believe it was a dry well, right? That the dry cleaner, yep, I'll let John.
I don't have knowledge about how it got there, seriously. It just got there. PERC is, keep in mind, you know, PERC is heavier than water, and it'll go through concrete, it'll go through soil, and then it also has a tendency, when it gets into water, it dissolves very easily, like salt in water, and that's why it spreads. So it's a great man-made compound that doesn't degrade very easily. So it's not uncommon for a dry cleaner to have this kind of a release, you know, in general. Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I bring that up is because people who don't like regulations, we end up paying in the end. That's what I'm trying to say. And then the other question that I had is, maybe I'm a little too Zen Buddhist, but so I assume when we heat it up, we're killing good microbes and earthworms and all the rest. So do we put them back?
Maybe. The bugs themselves, they're what we call mesophiles, and so they thrive in a temperature range that's a lot lower, right? So 20 to 40 degrees, but they don't actually die. They go dormant during the process. And so what we actually see post-thermal is actually a recolonization of all of the existing microorganismal populations. And in fact, they typically thrive afterwards because it is warmer, but we also have a lot of organic material that's basically been desorbed off that soil matrix. So they have a lot of food and a lot of stuff to kind of recolonize and repopulate. I'm sure, you know, earthworms might not be as lucky, but as far as the microorganismal populations, they're actually very, very little impact, if not beneficial.
I was just curious about the long-term soil health. Yep. And then can you remind me, or I don't don't know if this is an okay question, but what was the cost?
2.4 million, and we were on budget.
Well, it's fascinating. I really appreciate the presentation and all of your hard work. Thanks.
One other comment about the site, if I may, just a few seconds. The property's now, from my experience, I've done a lot of what we call brownfields redevelopment, working with developers. So your site now is now developable and sellable. And the work that can be done for a development on the property could be done even starting now. Personally, I did Juanita Village with a developer, and that was even more complicated than this site. And we were able to do the development at the same time as the cleanup. Here, you're ahead of the game. We've done the majority of the cleanup. So any developer or whoever might be buying that property, they could start, virtually now, and nothing that's going on there would stop them from being able to develop the property.
I'm so glad you asked to say that because I thought about asking the question. That's music to my ears.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for presentation. It was fabulous, fantastic. It was awesome to see that. So my question is on electricity. How much electricity is it taking?
Yeah, so it's typically for a site like this, it's about 260 kilowatt hours per cubic yard. I can't remember what our total. About 1.5. Yep, about 1.5 million kilowatt hours for this project is what was used.
And so on a daily average, so would you be able to produce through solar enough energy to run that system?
No, but so as an industry, what we've been looking at are definitely ways to make it more energy efficient. Some of it is so for this site, it being chlorinated solvents, it's difficult. But sites where it's petroleum hydrocarbons, we can actually use the petroleum hydrocarbons and repurpose them as a source of BTUs to then heat the ground with. So we actually combust the contaminants that we're pulling out of the ground to then recirculate heat through. There's other more energy efficient ways. It's a really good question, and it's kind of cutting edge, where we're going with the industry. But this is what we would call a typical ISTR or thermal source zone treatment with warm water biorecirculation system, right? But there are also projects where we implement solely a low temperature thermal approach. So the only goal is to heat a much larger dissolved phase groundwater plume to 30 degrees C to help those bugs out and to speed up the overall bioremediation process. Projects like that, it's very possible to use solar, wind energy alternative with the development and advancement in battery technology and batteries. It's becoming a much more viable option, and there is current R&D going in towards that. So,
okay, and then you had mentioned the Department of Ecology, and I think you touched on one of the questions I was going to ask is, you mentioned you can do it in existing buildings, and so properties we have or properties that we that are contaminated, are we or can you actually start that process prior to or during the development of a new property? So for instance, if we sold that property or a property and it was contaminated, is the Department of Ecology going to say this process is good enough that you can get it 100% to where they can start developing that property?
we've done that in the past, yes, at multiple sites. The limitations for whether it's applicable or not are you need groundwater below probably about 4 or 5 feet below the ground surface. The reason being you need at least 4 feet to have vapor recovery, right? So if you have groundwater all the way up to the top, you have a very limited room to recover all of those vapors. And the last thing you would want is any type of fugitive emissions issues, inside of a building. But as long as we have about 4 feet of what we call vadose zone or above the groundwater table, it's absolutely doable. And then the only other limitation would be the building itself needs to have enough access for either a direct push drill rig or some sort of smaller rotosonic drill rig. So that's typically, 15-foot ceiling heights, 12 to 15-foot ceiling heights with a limited access drill rig, and like some sort of double doors or some sort of, roll-up door or something for the actual access of the drill rig, and then egress kind of throughout the building. But if you have those two conditions, we can absolutely do it inside of active buildings or in the process of building. Yep.
Okay, and is there any restrictions on the proximity to like rivers and streams and things like that, tributaries?
There aren't. What we typically do is we monitor, so even on this project, in the street where we saw those subsurface installed electrodes, there's a sanitary sewer line and some subsurface utilities that run there. And so what we do is we put temperature sensors all along there to ensure that you don't have any heat mitigation or steam mitigation or contaminant migration over to that area. So we can monitor that throughout the process. And that's usually what's required, is just some sort of monitoring system to ensure that there are no issues.
Okay, and last question, as far as the cost analysis between different methodologies of removal of contaminated soil, this process, where does it fall? Most fiscally responsible, most economical? How does this process stand, like without digging out dirt, exporting it? Where does it fall?
Right. It was right there in the same type of cost for long-term bioremediation, but the timing was significantly different. So we got this done in 6 months. I'd be here 15 years from now telling you why we couldn't clean up the site, and I need another decade if we used it just bio. So it was just a smarter approach to do it. The cost of money, now is less than it would be 10, 15 years from now too. So I think that even in our analysis, in the end, really, it's going to be cheaper than what it could have been by doing any other technology for that very reason alone.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zorns?
I'm glad there's not going to be a test on this at the end. But what's that?
Actually, you had the comment earlier, and not to step on Recology's toes, about beetles that eat styrofoam. And there's actually microorganismal species, kind of like what we were talking about in the subsurface, that do that. And there are some companies now that are building bioreactors to basically build a thriving environment for those bugs and isolate them, and then basically feed stuff like styrofoam or other types of really hard to recycle materials into them. So just as an aside.
So beetles don't have the corner on the market. So I had 1/4 of micro, and it's a few decades old, so it's pretty dangerous. But I'm trying to understand how deep are we going?
So the deepest portion of that site was down from 5 feet below ground surface to 55 feet below ground surface.
Okay. And the heating up of the soil,
Yep.
is it because the solvent is adhered to like clays and things, and so you're trying to loosen and bubble it up?
Yeah,
and then at what point does the anaerobic bacteria sit to digest? Because I can't imagine sitting right next to 100 degrees centigrade is
Exactly,
a whole
yeah.
lot of fun.
And so that's why the so when we combine these systems, it's really a question of spatial and temporal kind of combinations, right? And you have to find the optimal way to do that. So the idea is source zone removal, because like you said, a lot of that contamination gets held up, especially so at this site you have, and throughout Washington, clays and really tight fine grain lithology. And a lot of in situ remediation technologies are very limited in their ability to basically get inside of that tight clay. With thermal, and especially with ERH, the passing of that electrical current actually causes, I don't want to get too weird on it, it causes like a nano like charge on the soil itself, and it actually desorbs the chlorinated species off of it. So it actually literally causes a physical desorption of that contaminant mass that's being held in that tight soil. So that, and once it desorbs, it quickly goes into the vapor phase at those temperatures. And that's how we're able to remove to such low cleanup goals in such a short amount of time. And then the second part of that question would be the bioremediation is once the subsurface starts to cool back down into that optimal range. So about 40 degrees C. So once it cools down about 60 degrees from the full-on thermal. Now, when you combine it with the recirculation system, you get a lot quicker reduction in your source zone temperatures because you're taking cold water from down the plume and recirculating it into the warm section and the warm water into the colder section. Okay. So it's basically kind of homogeneously heating up that much larger area to that good temperature range.
And then do you have to do like a probiotic treatment to the soil, or does it just rebound so quickly that you don't need to amend it at all?
Yeah, so part of John's strategy, Kane Environmental strategy for the biorecirculation system, and I'll let him talk a little more about this, but you basically add in an electron donor, and it's a secondary food source for them. So there's three main ways that you have reduction of basically biodegradation of chlorinated solvents. It's all anaerobic processes, but one of them is primary substrate metabolism, which is when the bugs eat the compounds themselves and break them down. And then there's a secondary one, which is it's anaerobic co-metabolism, and it's basically through an enzyme reaction where they eat an electron donor source, and the enzymes are what actually end up helping break down the compounds.
Fascinating. How much school did you have to go to get this? That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
Well, I'm not going to ask you any technical questions.
No problem.
Because, wow, I'm just really impressed. And I love what you're doing, and I'm glad that today our technology will prevent this kind of contamination from happening. The years that it happened was the 60s, and no one really knew much. And today we know much better than that.
We have one project, just kind of as a funny but not very funny story. We have one project that for 50 years they had a tank that held chemicals, right, for this large chemical manufacturing facility. And we were talking to some of the people that had been working on that site for almost 50 years, and they said for 50 years they called it the magic tank because it never filled up. Yeah, so yeah, you know, it's just kind of a good example of, you know, unfortunately what we know now and some of our practices in the past, you know, but luckily we have improving ways of dealing with this and hopefully cleaning it up for future generations, right? So.
Yes. So my question, though, was that you had said that you worked with developers that would, at this point where you are, could actually purchase the property and continue the cleanup. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
So I just was under the impression this property wouldn't be ready to be for sale till September, but in reality, it could be sold now.
From my point of view, but there's other issues going on with the city and their own internal concerns that, you know, I don't know about. All my points, just from a technical point of view,
Right.
You know, it could be sold now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
All right, everybody else is good. I was going to ask some questions, but we're way over time. I enjoyed your presentation. It was really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're on to city manager and council committee reports. None from the city manager. Council committee reports. Keep them short. Any? There we go, Deputy Mayor.
Sorry. Super quick, I just wanted to say there was a Sound Transit meeting, I don't know when was that, last week, about the 405 BRT. We shared with them that our preferred stop or connection between 405 and 522 BRT was still 195th, but that is not in their current plan, so we asked that they make that a priority for future funding. Sound Transit did commit, this is new news, to an inline stop at Brickyard. So that's, they don't currently have the funding for it, but they're confident they can find the funding for that. And we are still beating the drum of we need help concerning the Regional Growth Center and meeting our activity units And so as of yet, they don't really have a plan for how they're going to do that. And then just real quick, the Transportation Policy Board met last Thursday, and I think I spoke to you earlier about the difficulty in the federal requirements for grants, and they're having to find ways. Right now there's a gap of, I think it's $46 million that they weren't able to get projects to move forward on, and so that we voted on a new policy for kind of systematic ways to fill that gap by moving projects up. And I think Bothell had at least 4 projects that are being moved up because we fit in those categories. And then there was a slight issue. The city of Port Orchard came and asked for, against policy that we had just passed 15 minutes before, they asked for us to put them on the list. Merely because they were over budget, and the vote came back 12-5. The SCA caucus was split, but anyway, I was in the negative because I thought it was a bad precedent. So I think they're going to be having trouble in the future with people coming with their hat in hand and saying, "But we're over budget." But nevertheless, that's what happened. So those are my 2 updates.
Anybody over here have committee reports? Councilmember McAuliffe?
Thank you. So I was very pleased to attend the Parks and Recreation Board meeting on June 13th. I thought that some of the business that they brought up for new business, which was the feasibility study for the 4 acres on Wayne land, is on their agenda. The city's comprehensive plan and pros will also come together, and small playground assets replacement process is brought up as well. So we ask everybody to be involved in the survey for the pros plan, because I think that's critically important to hear from our citizens and our community about what they really want to see happen with our parks and recreation, and what we would like to fulfill, what their thoughts are. Also, they brought up the Main Street Planting Partnership, as well as the Bothell Downtown Action Committee did. And so I think this partnership is something that we really should highlight. It was a partnership between the city, University of Washington, and the business community. It was spearheaded by Lee Henderson from Alexis Café, and she was even out planting the flowers. But I think it's really critical that we know that now from 101st and Main to 102nd, we have a very beautiful outlay for our city of flowers and plants. And so both of those committees, Bothell Downtown Action Committee and the Parks Committee, recommended that we appreciate that. They also are going to have Tyler, and I know I have this note, who's going to continue maintaining this, and the city crew was absolutely amazing as far as the plantings go. So highlights and appreciation to all who were involved. Also, I wanted to bring up that hopefully, given the permit opportunity, July 5th, we will open our Bothell Friday Market at the Villas at Beardsley, which were being hosted by John Howie and the merchants at the Villas, and we're pretty excited about opening a market. So that's my report.
Councilmember McNeil?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to keep it short. My computer's having a few issues here. Regional Law, Safety, and Justice, I want to give a shout out to our chief. And again, as I said, my computer's down. I can't remember who represented us, but we had 2 officers, one from Bothell and the chief from Lake Forest Park, give a presentation at Regional Law, Safety, and Justice on the Navigator program, and around the table, the comments that were made about the program and the effects that it's having regionally. Hats off to you, Chief, for all the hard work, and our County Councilmember Rod Dombowski for making that happen in our community. Attending the RPC Regional Policy Committee, there was a couple things that came out of that committee this past meeting. One was a sub-regional map, and I will try to get a copy of this map out to Laura to get to you guys, but this map is disconcerting, and Councilmember Dombowski brought it up as well, that within this map, the North End cities, actually Bellevue is listed within the sub-regional area, which would mean that we're competing for dollars regionally with cities as large as Bellevue. So something we need to pay close attention to. We also had a conversation around homelessness. The city of Seattle and the executive King County are working to put together an ILA agreement between the city of Seattle and King County. And we had a conversation at PIC this month around that exact ILA and what that means for the other 38 cities within King County. The concern is that making sure that we are sitting at the table or part of that conversation so that we're not, King County is not expending funding that would go to homelessness all within the city of Seattle. And the conversation came up about the fact that we all have different types of homelessness within our communities and making sure that we're recognizing those different types of homelessness, especially here when we have homeless kids couch surfing. So that conversation is to be continued, but we want to make sure that we're staying tuned and engaged in that process so that an ILA is not struck and then it removes funding that we would need here locally within our community. Pre-PIC, there was a conversation around Metro Transit and potential funding sources. More to come on this. I think it's we're going to hear a lot more from cities. This potentially could have an effect on our budget locally here in Bothell and other cities, but there's a measure, Seattle passed a levy in 2014. It's going to expire in 2020 for Metro services. So they're looking at finding ways to fund the $220 million worth of revenue that's going to be needed. So I can bring further updates on that in the future as well. Those are my reports. Thank you.
All right, any other reports? We're good. Okay, moving on to visitor comment. Each person addressing the council will give his or her name in an audible tone of voice for the record, and unless the council grants further time, shall limit the address to 3 minutes. No person other than the council and the person having the floor will be permitted to enter into any discussion either directly or through a member of the council without the permission of the mayor. And I have Lee Henderson.
My name is Lee Henderson, and thank you, Rosemary, for the acknowledgement of Main Street. It was a pleasure to work with the City of Bothell and Tyson Kemper from the University of Washington, and the business owners. It was a joy, and it was easy and uncomplicated, which is some parts of life we all like. What I'm talking about tonight, though, doesn't have to do that. Later on in the program, you're going to be discussing the financial report and also the court service option study. And I looked over both of those in the last weekend, and I want to thank you for posting those early so that citizens can have an opportunity to see them. I reviewed the quarterly financial report and found that our city operates a $105 million biennial budget fund from 2019 to 2020. And the court has almost the smallest impact on that budget in a chart over 13 different departments. It's a graph I studied and looked at, and I've done a lot with budgets and finances over my 28 years in business, so I made the best of understanding what I was looking at, and the courts generate a total of $1.5 million. That's their revenue and expenses, I assume. That is less than 1.5% of the general fund budget. So one must ask themselves why? Why the court? And why are all the other departments free from the same scrutiny to save money? That's the question I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to give public comment? Going once, twice. Okay, moving on. The consent agenda, nothing's been pulled. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by the Deputy Mayor, second by Councilmember Agnew. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. Passes unanimously. Next, we're on to new business, 19-103, potential plan and code amendments for minimum density and residential activity center zoning, and we have Mr. Blackburn.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. This is a minimum density discussion about the RAC, or Residential Activity Zone, within the city of Bothell. The Residential Activity Center Zone is basically an area that we have established along a bunch of major transportation corridors. It embraces mixed use, provides a range of housing types, and has an important contribution to the housing population capacity, essentially 12,000 people, or 20% of our 2035 housing target. So it is a very important contributor to that. You have some policy considerations on this initiation. One, of course, is should we require a minimum level of development, that's intensity or activity units, basically human beings, particularly within the Canyon Park and the North Creek, Northeast 195th Street subareas, and what 2019 docket items we want to defer to accommodate for this use. And of course, this has got some important connections to some council goals. Certainly help support retaining the regional growth center designation for Canyon Park. And if it is initialized, we're going to talk about some options and implications for establishing minimum levels of development within these RAC zones. This RAC zone was created in 2002, and it was primarily focused toward the city's activity centers. And it was a very important component to avoiding an increased population growth within many of our established residential areas. It's important because there's some assumed capacities in our buildable lands analysis. King County essentially estimates that we get about 6,200 residents within the RAC zone within the King County portion. Snohomish County establishes about 5,600 residents. Again, that's 20% of our capacity growth for 2035, a very important contributor. Earlier RAC developments generally met those assumed densities. And this kind of table kind of shows we had one called Emerald Crest and Beardley Village, both established those, kind of like the 50 or more dwelling units per acre. Urban Village, which is basically within the country village area, is got a 35-foot cap, so it never was going to be able to attain those numbers. Recent development proposals within the RA zone have proposed townhome developments, and they are not achieving those assumed densities, except for one, which is called the Canyon Park Apartments. And this map kind of shows some of the asterisk locations of where those areas are. A couple others where they're located within the North Creek subarea include Preston North and Preston South. Again, they are achieving dwelling unit per acre levels that are very low in comparison to what our assumptions were. Certainly, this is important for the Canyon Park Regional Growth Center. And of course, we all know about the Puget Sound Regional Council framework criteria, which establishes a minimum amount of activity units that the city of Bothell has to both have existing and has to plan for. And the plan figure is that's important, it's 45. 45 AU basically means 45 residents or employees. Either combination works. What you have to do is you have to convert that to a land use density, and that, dwelling units per acre, or some type of a floor area ratio to achieve a certain number of employees per square foot. Those are basically the categories that we'd be investigating if we do initiate this particular code amendment and plan and code amendment. Important that we have to look at staff resources. Again, our 2019 docket is full. We are anticipating about 125 to 175 hours by the time we go through the entire process. There's two tasks that we could partially defer into 2020, and that would be item 7B, which is the accessory dwelling unit code amendments. We had estimated about 124 hours for that. We probably can defer that to 2020. We've been waiting to some work from Arch and a bunch of communities. That work has been delayed a little bit. It's not happening quite as quickly, so we can probably safely defer that to 2020. And the multifamily tax exemption, we had a lot of hours dedicated to that in 2019. We think we can reduce that time a little bit for 2019, start the work this year, and then complete it in 2020 when we've got a little bit more time. So that's one of the other items that you'll have to consider when you can think about this. Finally, our recommended action is to initiate this as a 2019 Plan and Code Amendment to analyze potential minimum development activity levels within the RAC Plan Designation Zoning Classification. We think you should assign these to the Planning Commission for a recommendation, as well as amend the 2019 docket by deferring docket item 7B to 2020 and deferring completion, still do some of it, but completion of item number 7C to 2020. So that completes my presentation, so I'm here for questions. Thank you.
All right, questions? Councilmember Zorns.
Well, this makes sense. And when I was seeing discussion of things being held off to 2020, my reaction was, but that's so far away. And then I did the month counting, and it's not. My concern, yes, run this through Planning Commission. My concern is, how is it going to impact? That's the first question. How is it going to impact neighborhoods that surround the area? You guys have that conversation. My only request is, ADU is kind of arch-dependent, and they have other fish to fry, so we're going to have to wait on that anyway. Am I understanding that correctly? The MFTE, I don't know if I have an inordinate enthusiasm for this, but my hopes and prayers is that this is at the front of 2020 and not at the end of 2020.
Yes, and that's why we want to start work on that in 2019, because then you get that energy going to it, and it makes it a little more easy for
Get
us
the
to
momentum
justify
going.
completing it in 2020.
Okay, and so those are my only comments.
Thank you.
And Mayor, if I could just add a little bit to what Mr. Blackburn said. On the MFTE, one of the reasons we think we're able to defer that a little bit in terms of the hours that we had allocated for this year is we're also going to be working with Arch on that project. So we have not yet been able to begin that project with Arch because of their workload and other priorities. So we're in conversation with them, and we think we can get a good start on that this year.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So I just wanted to verify that these areas are along transit routes.
Yes, in fact, one of the things, when the RAC was initially basically formatted and enacted, it was really important that it have that really strong connection to transportation systems.
Okay, well, I've already spoken about the challenges, the further challenges we're going to be suffering from the 12 acres of the bus barn that's coming our way from Sound Transit. So this makes complete sense to me. Absolutely move forward. And I mean, I had the same concerns about the multifamily tax exemption, but as long as we keep plugging away, I'm happy. So thank you.
We're good at that.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a question around the Canyon Park Apartments, and then the Track 24 townhomes, 231 to 531. Are we seeing any uptick in condominiums at all, or are we still fighting that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we want to continue to have a discussion about, because we want to encourage a little bit more of that ownership percentage. The townhomes that were proposed here did not really specify whether they were going to be owner occupied or not, and our code doesn't really have a specific provision on that. So it could be a rental or either for sale. The Canyon Park Apartments more than likely would be a rental product, but again, it's really super easy in the process. We have not had a lot of discussions with that developer on what his intention is there.
Okay, thank you.
So it looks like the council's okay with your suggestion to move this up, and move this other two to 2020? Do you feel like you got that?
I think I do.
Do you need a motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's moved by Councilmember Olson, seconded by, let's give that one, you want that one? Okay, Councilmember Agnew, to defer 2 items on our docket. Do I have them right here? Oh, gosh. I don't have them right in front of me here.
7B and 7C.
7B and 7C to move up or add the minimum density for the Canyon Park sub-area. Does that work for you?
Yes.
All right.
We'll make it work.
Any discussion on the motion? You want to discuss the motion?
Yeah,
Councilmember McNeil?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will be supporting the motion. I'm not sure if I read this correctly, but in the new business, something seemed 7C until later in 2019, but it says item 7C in 2020, but I will be supporting the motion.
All right, any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, place your vote. That passes unanimously. We are on to, thank you, Bruce, or Mr. Blackburn, sorry. Discussion update items, AB 19-104, first quarter 2019 financial report with Mr. Bothell.
Good evening. This is the first presentation of financial data for the 2019-2020 biennium. The report covers the period of January 1st through March 31st, the first quarter of 2019. This update serves several purposes. First, it informs the City Council and the community regarding how the actual financial results are coming in relative to the various predictions that we made during budget deliberations. Second, it's an opportunity for staff to provide an update on notable trends that affect the city's finances and to begin the conversation about course correction if required. And finally, it's an opportunity to provide data about department expenditures for transparency and accountability. As you can imagine, the city's financial system contains a tremendous amount of data. Rather than bore you with a detailed discussion of all the items of revenue and expenditure that are predictable and/or stable, this update will focus on items that are volatile or noteworthy. A more detailed reporting of the quarterly activities included in your agenda materials. The theme for this update is unremarkable. Unremarkable is often thought of as negative, but not in this case. The first quarter financial performance and economic trend is unremarkable because revenues and expenditures are consistent with budgeted amounts and the economic outlook is stable. I will highlight a few noteworthy items, starting with the general fund. General fund revenues in the first quarter was slightly below budget. This is primarily attributable to low sales tax collections. Sales tax receipts were nearly 2% below budgeted amounts. It's important to note, however, that sales tax is highly seasonal, and we do not make seasonal adjustments for this reporting. Sales tax is measured by retail sales activity, and as you might expect, the first quarter collections for sales tax are typically the lowest of the year. Staff expects sales tax collections to increase as we move through the year and do not believe that the first quarter collections are a cause for concern. So on the expenditure side, all operating departments are demonstrating good budget discipline, resulting in below budget spending for all but 3 departments. Below budget department expenditures are a favorable trend and one that staff is hopeful will continue through the biennium. Savings on the expenditure side more than offset the slightly below budgeted revenues. If this continues throughout the biennium, we would realize a smaller operating deficit than was budgeted. And I would be remiss if I did not add the disclosure that it's very early in the biennium and premature to predict how the city will end the biennium, but early indications are positive. So outside of the general fund, a noteworthy performer was real estate excise tax, or REIT. As a reminder, REIT is a funding source that many capital projects rely on and also funds the lease payments for City Hall. So REIT receipts were nearly double their projected period-to-date budget, and we're excited by this result, but we expect strong REIT performance for the rest of the biennium, but the extraordinary result in the first quarter is an anomaly caused by some individually significant property transactions. So what's left is utility and capital fund revenues and expenditures, and those are generally consistent with budget and unremarkable. So just really quickly, I want to give you a quick update on the economic forecast. So in general, economists are predicting a continuation of the low inflation, low unemployment environment that we've been experiencing for some time. So most economists are predicting a slight slowing of growth for the next several years. While there is some chatter about a looming market correction, as far as I can tell, that's based on the length of the long period of growth that we've been experiencing rather than on the economic fundamentals. So it appears likely that we will experience a continuation of the current economic environment for the rest of the biennium. The economic forecast is stable and continues the unremarkable theme. So finally, I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention that the new quarterly reporting format is now out. We'll continue to refine that and with a focus on brevity and providing information that is easily understood by technical and non-technical audiences alike. And we are looking forward to publishing a monthly financial dashboard to provide interested parties access to more timely financial data. So be on the lookout for those changes and share any feedback you have with the city manager. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Very unremarkable. Thank you for your first financial report. That's awesome. Is there any questions? They're blown away. Oh, Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the dashboard you had brought up and mentioned, and transparency. We hear transparency quite a bit, being fiscally responsible. And I know that we do a lot of great things, City Hall, but how do we show the community what we're actually doing? Is that something that we're looking into for the future?
So in terms of the financial dashboard, the charts that are in your materials, the agenda materials, those are kind of that's the start of the dashboard. So you're going to see things like where are we in sales tax collections for the year relative to budget, where are we for real estate excise tax, and then you've got like general fund revenue compared to expenses. So it gives you kind of a up-to-date look at where we are in terms of deficit or surplus. We're also going to be publishing data for departments, and there was a chart in your materials where we showed what the department budget was, and then we showed where their spending was year to date, or period to date, and then relative percentages. And those types of things will allow the city council and the community to track if our spending is on target with budgeted amounts. So it'll allow some transparency, but it'll also keep us accountable. So it's going to be out there for everybody where departments are relative to their budgets. So we won't go long periods without knowing, or get to the end of a period and yeah.
Fabulous. And as far as the tracking of where the departments are today, you and I had a conversation earlier. It seems like we're tracking pretty good. Yes.
All departments are doing a great job. There's 3 departments are a little bit over budget percentage to date, but there's a lot of one-time expenses that come up, and those are the result of those, and they're relatively minor. So I think the expectation is that we'll look for opportunities to save elsewhere in those budgets and not look up for a budget amendment, but no guarantees.
Okay. And then when is our next budget cycle? When will we start planning for our next budget?
Well, by statute, we're required to open up the budget for the mid-biennial budget adjustment and just look. We don't have to make an adjustment, but we have to look at it. So I'll report back to you kind of where we are. And then you guys will decide whether or not, the city manager will propose an adjustment or not. We're going to be forced to make an adjustment because we don't have the levy and bond in the current budget. So we're going to do some adjustment. But whether or not there's operating aspects to that will be up to the city manager and the city council.
Okay, so it sounds like we have some tough decisions for the next biennium budget that we're going to set, and it's going to be a process, and it sounds like we'll have some engagement and some transparency during that process. So I look forward to the next budget cycle. I guess is where I'm going with this is we have some tough decisions to make. We need to look at all departments wherever our money is going. Need to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible for our community, and so I look forward to that process. So thank you.
Any other questions? Finance Director, questions? No? I just have one quick question. Thanks for your report. I think it's really, really good. It's a huge improvement. I had 2 questions, actually. One of them was this adult probation services. It's like $500,000, and what is that?
Yeah, so there's 5 items. We had 2 council members in briefings ask similar questions. So there's 5 items on there that the accounting, there's a column in that reporting. So this is a refinement that's going to come. We're actually going to get rid of that column because it's meaningless. The next column over actually shows what the accrued revenue is. So there's 5 items on that report that show a negative revenue amount. And it's just a funky accounting thing that's just really kind of confusing. They're either deposits or reversals of accruals, which is just kind of it's just a distraction. So we're going to get rid of that.
It's an accountant thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the tables that you provided in the council memo, you said this is going to be the kind of part of the dashboard, or you have similar. Are these the type of things where actually a resident can go online and just click on it and like drill in to the different, all the way down to like the account line items?
So I think that we have access to an open data portal with the new financial software. We haven't talked about launching something like that. These would be just like PDFs that you'd be able to click on and see the actual financial performance. We would put the numbers behind it too, so that people that weren't really that into the graphs could look at the numbers as well. We can certainly talk about an open data portal, but it's not something that we're talking about right now.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
You can get lost in those things when you start digging it. Okay, great. Thank you. You did a great job. And we are on to AB 19-105, report on emergency firework ban process. And I believe it's the assistant city manager. Are you going to do it?
I sure am.
Okay, it says Jennifer on here.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kelly Mazzoli, Assistant City Manager here at the City of Bothell. I do have a presentation. How do I pull that up? Okay, this evening I'll be reporting on our emergency fireworks ban process. And to begin with, I thought I would do a brief overview of the recent history of this topic as related to the city council actions that you've taken for the benefit of the public, primarily. This sort of broader conversation started in 2015. There was a conversation about a statewide emergency fireworks ban due to the weather conditions back in 2015. And so on April 5th of 2016, the City Council did choose to adopt an ordinance, number 2190, which allowed for an emergency fireworks ban during periods of high fire danger in response to that. November 8th of 2016, the City Council chose to take an advisory proposition to the Bothell voters to see if they would support a ban. That came back no, and that was both counties no, and the combined opposition was 53.35% to that. May 14th of 2019, during council conversations, there was a request from a council member to consider a possible ban on fireworks again. As of May 21st, staff came back during your quarterly update on council goals and asked for some direction. The consensus was not to pursue an overall fireworks ban here in the city at this time due to the advisory vote that had just occurred in the end of 2016, but we did say that we would come back and provide this report on our emergency ban procedures that are in place. The emergency fireworks ban is on the sale and the use, and this is Bothell Municipal Code 8.37.215. The city manager can recommend to the city council that there be an issuance of a temporary emergency order to ban the sale, use, and possession of fireworks if hazardous conditions exist, where the sale and use of these consumer fireworks would pose a severe wildland urban interface fire hazard, increasing risk and or threatening public safety. So this is pretty strict, stringent criteria. It's a pretty high bar to meet. But after monitoring the conditions, the city manager will consult with the fire chief and the police chief before making that recommendation. But she would bring that to the city council and recommend a emergency ban. The different types of conditions that we would be looking to monitor. So as of June 15th, Bothell Fire Department has started regularly reporting to us on some different information that includes from sources such as the National Weather Service, forecasting. The Washington State Fire Marshal's Office puts out recommendations. Also, the Washington State Department of Natural Resources have different burn bans that they put out, so we're monitoring all of that. We will be looking at Snohomish and King County information that comes out related to this, as well as our daily local calls, any that involve fireworks or brush fires or anything of that nature. So this is ongoing all the way up to July 4th and has already begun as of June 15th. As of June 27th, we'll add an additional layer to that, which is monitoring all calls in the Zone 1 area. So Zone 1 basically includes the cities that are listed here, which are all of our surrounding cities. So if those severe and hazardous conditions warrant an emergency ban, what will end up happening is that the city manager would bring a recommendation to the city council to issue that temporary emergency ban. The city council may choose to do so, and they can do so for a specified period of time. And we would then communicate that emergency order using every avenue that we have possible to get out to the public, social media, on our website, and reaching out to parties that we could reach out to that maybe sell fireworks, things like that, and get the information out. An emergency ban would include prohibiting the sale, the use, the possession of all consumer fireworks. And what we would be looking at for a timing after we discuss this among staff is that we would possibly have a special city council meeting in late June if the conditions are showing and we can make that call. That would be ideal prior to the sale of the fireworks. However, as late as up to July 2nd, depending on weather conditions, which can be, pretty dynamic. So just as a reminder, I thought I would put out there too for the public is that if there is no emergency ban put in place, then the sale and purchase of consumer fireworks should only be occurring in Bothell between July 1st and July 4th. The use of consumer fireworks can only be on July 4th legally, and that's from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. and they cannot be discharged in any park. So just to keep that in note, that that's not an appropriate place. I thought I would also touch briefly on the fireworks safety tips that we're putting out, as well as the public outreach that council requested us. So you can visit our website for those tips. They're on bothellwa.gov/fireworks safety if you want to go straight to that page. There will be a banner on the homepage of our website, so that's easy for people coming and taking a look. They can just click there and it'll take them to these tips. Also, if you monitor our social media sites, you're going to start seeing some of those posts coming out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. They actually began on June 12th, and they'll continue to increase in frequency as we get closer. So it's timely information as people are getting revved up for the July 4th holiday. And with that, I will answer any questions you might have.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one question. I don't really understand how the decision is going to be made, but if there were a burn ban, is that enough to have an emergency ban?
I don't believe that would meet the strictest and most stringent requirements that we have as it's listed in our ordinance.
Because isn't a burn ban based on air quality? Or is it based on fire safety? Like, I'm asking, I don't actually know the answer.
I can defer to our fire marshal. Noble is here. He might have something to add to that.
So the burn bans during the wintertime are air quality burn bans, and generally in the summer, that's not an air quality burn ban. The last 2 years, 2017, 2018, were the first 2 years that the Puget Sound Clean Air folks actually implemented a burn ban in the summer. So it's a sign that times are changing. To directly answer your question, a burn ban would not be implemented by Puget Sound Air normally. It would be implemented by the Washington State Fire Marshal, and that's generally due to the extremely dry conditions. And fireworks are not something that the State Fire Marshal is willing to take on as far as banning. That's up to local municipalities above and beyond a burn ban.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
Thank you. So there's just a couple of things I've always talked about when it comes to fireworks. And first of all, I know it's too late this year, but I would like to see us have a partnership with the school districts in order to put this information out for the children. You know, we actually stopped smoking in public places, and parents stopped smoking because children said, but that's not healthy. And we taught them that. So in the future, we might think about a partnership with our school districts to help our children understand the safety measures and the dangers that we have with fireworks. And that would help a lot for them to tell their parents about what they learn in school and the safety part. The other part of this is, and I've said this before, if we figure out how to actually have fireworks in our cities, so a display again, and replace that with a ban, I think that would be wonderful. But I know there's a way to go. I'll just keep thinking about it. Thank you.
Councilmember Zorns.
This is a question that I think I probably know the answer to. And I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion on it, so some of this may be thinking out loud. Can cities, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe at AWC, if this is a place that we can go, request State Patrol to more heavily monitor sales coming off the reservation without infringing tribal rights for selling fireworks? I know that in the past they have State Patrol has sat off of tribal lands to watch for people coming off of fireworks, you know, with what would be illegal fireworks here in Bothell. Is that something that you think cities could ask State Patrols to?
We can always ask.
Okay.
They have staffing shortages like we do.
Right.
And what their work plan is and how they distribute their staffing.
Same kind of conversations we have.
Yep.
But it might be worth asking. Okay.
Councilmember Olson.
In the packet that we had, there was some of the tables that had some previous years and some weather correlations, and I just wanted to comment on that. And I found it very interesting where you could really see the uptick in responses and incidents on those years that were warmer and drier. I'm assuming drier, just with the temperatures that they had. And then I think there's, the lowest year had the 60-degree in there, and it was an interesting chart, and I was hoping it was going to be in the presentation to the council, but
I actually do have that slide if you want to see it.
yeah, no, I think it was great, and I just wanted to, thank you for pulling it up, because I think it is useful and a good talking point, because 2016, when we had the 66-degree average temp for that week, basically, and that was the lowest responses and calls for service. So I think it comes into relation with how we're monitoring the weather, and that there is a correlation with, if we do have a hot and dry lead up to 4th, that there is a correlation to it. But looking outside right now, I'm not seeing that correlation coming to fruition really right now. So thanks for pulling that up. I think there was a lot of great additional background in the packet that you pulled together. So thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is around the July 1st to July 4th date. So we see fireworks stands popping up around the area. And are they supposed to be selling fireworks before July 1st?
The stands that are located within the city of Bothell and have their permits are not allowed to sell except for July 1st through July 4th.
Okay, so there should be no selling of any fireworks July 1st through 4th. And then as far as letting those fireworks off, you're allowed to let them off when?
July 4th only.
One more time.
July 4th only.
Okay, thank you very much.
Everybody follows that rule. Any other? Oh, there we go. Councilmember Agnew.
Well, thank you for this update. The 4th of July is always an interesting time for the fire service. There's no question about that. And I know the weather's been nice today, but I think the forecast is for dry and hotter. And we all need to know what we can do to help mitigate some of the problems that we see during those times. I think part of this whole process was brought on because we had a really dry, hot summer one year, and the governor decided he was going to ban fireworks and realized he couldn't. And that's when this all started. And then as a city, we said, well, what can we do? And everybody came back and said, well, you can make an ordinance, but you can't follow it till next year. So hence, here we are today. I hope we don't have to use it. If we do, we need to. And the people need to be careful. I mean, there's still a lot of cedar shake roofs out there, and they still go to structure fires all the time on the 4th. They don't like that. So be careful out there, as people say.
I think that's it. You made it. All right, so we're going to go to break before our next agenda item. So we're going to come back at 8:05. All right, council is back from break, and we're going to dive into AB 19-106, Court Services Options Study. And I believe the city manager, are you kicking this off, or are we just hand it over?
We're going to hand it right over to our consultants who performed this independent third-party study.
Welcome.
Let's see. Let me know if you can't hear me. Good evening. My name is Karen Reed. I'm happy to see you all here in a different capacity than the last time I was here, or different before the time I was here before that. Tonight, Ann Flug here and I are going to present the results of our court option study. We do have a really long slide deck, but we're going to try to go through it quickly and just touch the high points. By way of introduction, I am an attorney by training. I have been spending the last 30-plus years working with local governments in Western Washington in a variety of capacities, and have had the fortune to do a lot of work on court and criminal justice system issues. And Ann has been working in local government management for 40 years, and this is her 23rd court study. She's also, as you probably know, a former city manager for the city of Bothell, and has done an awful lot of work on criminal justice issues for both local jurisdictions as well as the state and the legislature. So we're happy to be here tonight. Process-wise, I'd like to propose, since the slide deck is so long, we've got about 10 break points built in it, and if we could hold questions and then take them at the break points, if that would work with folks. Does that work? Okay, we'll do that. We're going to go pretty fast and try to focus on the highlights here. We know that since this is a study session, you're not making decisions tonight. You're just sort of hearing us out. At the end of our report, we do have some specific recommendations, but most of this is analysis. What we're showing you tonight is sort of the top lines of the study. The actual report has more detail in it and supporting detail, and that can be made available to you, obviously, at any point if you want to see more of the detail behind what we're presenting here tonight. So I was just trying to look around for my opening remarks, which I have managed to lose, so I'll just make those up. I was going to say that if you remember nothing else coming out of here, remember that what we're trying to tell you is that you do have a number of viable options in front of you that could work. We do think there are a number of short-term actions that you could take that would be steps in a positive direction in terms of some best practices, and we're going to outline those for you. We think that it's important to remember that while we're talking in some cases about changing revenue streams at the court is not, in our view, and we don't believe the court should be viewed as a mechanism for raising revenue, but we are going to be talking about revenues in the court because that impacts your net cost for the taxpayers of the operation. Cost, of course, also is only one of many criteria that you would want to use to analyze what you do with your court. So we want to say that at the outset as well. And I think that's it for now. So I'm going to dive into this now, and if I'm going too fast or too slow, just give me the high sign and we'll get going. I'm going to take point on most of this, and Ann will chime in particular on some of the financial data, which she was on point for collating and developing. So it's been 26 years that you have had a municipal court in the city, and you used to be party with the district court out of the Redmond Division. Judge Gelson has been your appointed judge since 2010, and we were asked to look at a number of different options for you to provide court services. Specifically, we're looking at these three options: continuing the status quo, contracting with King County District Court, or possibly contracting for municipal court services with another city. And the city that we chose to study and the cost data and other service data that we're presenting here tonight was with the city of Kirkland. So the criteria that we committed to evaluate these three options on are up here, these 6 criteria, and we'll go through what the results were under each of them over the course of tonight. And as shown, net cost is one of those, but there are lots of other important criteria. And depending on how you individually or collectively balance these criteria, you're going to want one option or another. And that's really totally a local decision. What we did to come up with this data, we met with a whole lot of folks, did some interviews as well on the phone. We've looked at financial data from all of the courts. We have talked to the staff at the Administrative Office of the Courts to gather data on statewide stuff as well as Bothell-specific data. We did site visits at each of the courts, and we met with the judges at each of the courts. We utilize city staff as secret shoppers. We sort of deploy them as anonymous court customers to observe how it would be as an average court customer to try to find something out on the website, experience the different court facilities, try to talk to somebody on the phone. So some of the results of that are in here as well. And we did a tremendous amount of work trying to build the data sets, collecting all the financial data from various parts of the city that impact the criminal justice system. So I'll stop there. So summary conclusions. Again, you do have a number of viable options. Depending on which criteria are most important to you, how you balance them, you're going to prefer one option over another. The municipal court option is the most expensive at this point, but there are a number of strategies you could deploy in the short term that might adjust the cost of operating. And those tend to be sort of systemic things. You want to look at all parts of the criminal justice system that you're responsible for. And you're at a really particularly interesting point in time because you're about to deploy 10 officers on the streets over the next 2 years. And that could have a really significant impact on your municipal court caseload and the nature of that caseload depending on the policies that you choose for deploying those officers. So there's a lot of variability in terms of where you may be in a few years with your municipal court caseload because of that significant increase in police officers that will soon be out there. We're going to present some cost numbers tonight. Those are based on data we've gathered from the other court service providers and from the city. But obviously those are numbers that if you chose to make a change and go to a different service provider, there would be negotiations involved, and the final numbers will end up being different than anything we're presenting here. And again, what happens with the police officers on the street will also impact the costs of any option that you pursue. Again, we've identified a number of near-term actions that we think it might be a good idea for you to take. And the first one is to sort of think, as we talk about options tonight, about things that you are more or less interested in pursuing over the next several months after we leave the scene. So, any questions so far? Okay. Background. So, you probably know most of this, so I'll go over this pretty quickly, but obviously you have responsibility as a city for ensuring that there is a court of some sort that can adjudicate violations of your local code, and that is specifically infractions and misdemeanors, things that are, as you can see up here, speeding tickets, parking tickets, things that are punishable by up to a year in jail. Things that are over a year, felonies, those go to Superior Court, okay? You know this stuff. There are 3 different ways that cities can provide these options, this court service option, and those are represented by the 3 options that we are studying here. And you can see just within King County, cities have made very different choices. These, either do it yourself, contract with the county, or contract with another city. There's a broad array of choices that your neighbor cities have made. Similarly, in Snohomish County, you'll see people are utilizing all these options. The local jurisdictions make their own policy assessment about what will work best for them, for whatever mix of reasons that are important to them, and off they go. So obviously the courts are one part of criminal justice. You also have to be thinking about the public defender, the prosecutor, police, jail, victims advocates, diversion programs, things like that. And all of those pieces and parts of the system are really interactive. If you change something over here, it's going to show up, there will be some impacts over there. So systems thinking is particularly appropriate and important, I think, if you're analyzing your choices in and around criminal justice. This is just a picture of thinking about the system and how you start with the police arresting folks, and eventually most of them will either be let go or they're going to get something filed in court by them. And as you go through the system, you're going to see more people are dropping away, right? Not everybody that gets arrested goes through the court system. Cite and release is the most common outcome for people that are arrested and tried in the court. And the local courts systems are a majority of the cases represented up here. Handle a majority of the cases up here. This is a quick snapshot of the different types of crimes and statewide, on average, the last time the state of Washington ran this particular report. They don't do it very often. We didn't have budget to ask them to run it for us this year, but 5 years ago. This gives you a sense of the predominance of different types of cases statewide that appear in local courts. And your case profile is interestingly different from that, this particular average, and we'll get into that as we go forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about some trends in what you're seeing in the criminal justice system. And we are seeing over the last decade plus probably lower courts shifting from a punishment approach to more of a restorative justice approach, saying, well, if you're not a danger to the community, should we be focusing instead on ways to maybe get your life back on track and keep your family and your economic circumstances going? And so there's been a lot more work around evidence-based programs that can help those types of changes in behavior and outcomes for people happening. And as costs of everything keep going up, criminal justice costs have gone up very remarkably for cities over the last, well, 30 years. And so you're seeing more and more people thinking, well, how can I maybe get together with my friends who have the same problem, and maybe we'll save some money by pooling our resources. And there's lots of examples of that locally and regionally around the state. You're also seeing excess capacity in the facilities because the lower court caseload has been steadily declining statewide as well as around here for the last several years. And like everything else in our lives, there's nothing that technology can't show up and say, oh, you need this new system. It's really going to help you. And you're seeing lots of new systems, technology systems being introduced into the courts as well, with all the attendant joys that brings. Sometimes it's great efficiencies and you have great data mining capability, and other times you're making people nuts because they don't know how to use the systems. But you're seeing that in the criminal justice system as elsewhere. So when we talk about restorative justice and the restorative approach to justice, we're thinking it's a different way of thinking about what the mission of the court system is. And it calls into play different types of programs and responses other than just this person should go sit for 30 days in jail. It's like, well, maybe this person should go to one of these other types of evidence-based programs, and that would be less expensive for us and maybe more helpful for that person. And so this is when just because some people are not familiar with the term, we wanted to include a couple of these slides here. Questions so far? Okay, I'm going to keep going. What's going on here in Bothell specifically? This is, if you think about what we were just talking about, how there's been a move from a very traditional lock 'em up approach to lower courts to moving towards more restorative justice approaches. This is a sort of our assessment about where the city of Bothell is on that spectrum. And this is one of those, this is not a judgment. This is just an observation. This is a policy decision that the city can make or can just find itself in if it hasn't consciously thought, where do we want to be in terms of our approach to criminal justice? And we think that you are moving out of the traditional to, you have some restorative justice, you have the youth court at the court, and you do engage some alternatives to detention, such as home monitoring and alcohol monitoring. So you're moving in that direction, and this council, this is a place where you folks have a say in what should our emphasis be overall as a city. How do we want to engage these parts of our system? You have a full service local court now. This is a picture of the courtroom. You probably looks familiar. You do all the case processing. You have the special youth traffic court that meets once a month. You also have a probation services department for adults. The court collects fines and fees that are imposed by the judge. They screen people to see if they're indigent, and if they are indigent, they get the assistance of a public defender, and they maintain all the records for the court. Not in the court budget, but intimately involved in how the court is operating are, of course, things like the prosecutor, the victim's advocate, your ability to refer cases to other specialty courts that you don't operate now, which you have the ability. King County specialty courts for misdemeanors are open to you. If the prosecutor wants to refer a defendant to one of those courts, they may do so. The police department is overseeing your jail contract, as well as the electronic monitoring contracts, and they also have a victim's advocate. Wait a second, that advocate is actually in the city attorney's office. Pretend that second bullet isn't there. And the city manager's office also contracts for the public defender. Of course, there are other people that care about how this whole system works too. The defendants, the folks that are called into court, 72% of them do not live in Bothell, which is, it's not a shocking statistic, but it's noteworthy that that's a very large percentage of the folks that are the defendants. But then the victims, the witnesses, the jurors, and are all, virtually all of them are going to be living in Bothell. And other people that care about how well this whole system is working are those who live or work here, obviously. Here's a picture of how your cases have been going, the caseload's been going historically in your municipal court. And it has declined even as your population has grown, and that's consistent with what lower courts are seeing across the state. Your mix of filings, misdemeanors to infractions, you're pretty heavy on misdemeanors. Most people would see more infractions in their caseload in the lower courts, and that has implications for your revenue recovery. We talked a little bit about the top 10 case filings in other courts. Here's what they are for you folks. And the things which are sort of noteworthy is the after the traffic infractions, the possession of drug paraphernalia. That's much higher in this city than it is in other statewide averages. Now, part of that is due to the decision by the Superior Court not to prosecute certain types of drug offenses, and so they come down, all the good stuff rolls downhill, right? So it ends up falling to the municipal court to be prosecuting some of those offenses. You have an average of 212 cases filed per month in the court. So I'm going to let Ann speak to this. This is a look at the costs and how those have changed over time for the court.
Good evening. I get to say that now. This is to give you an idea of, in this entire system, when you look at a particular unit of service, how much it costs and how that cost has changed from 2016 to 2018, just that 3-year window. So a police incident is anytime an officer or initiates I don't want to say it's an interaction because it's not an interaction, but an enforcement action would be a better description with someone in Bothell, or they're dispatched to do so. So it's either officer or dispatch initiated. And the cost in 2016 was lower than it is today. The 3 in the middle, the court case, the defense and prosecution case, and the probation officer case, those are individual cases that are processed by those 3 groups of people. And all together, if you're sitting in a courtroom, that's the cost that's accumulating for the case that's being processed in the courtroom. And you can see there that the costs have changed somewhat, with the defense and prosecution declining, and as well as probation declining, and the court cases increasing. And the main reason that's happening is because your caseload has changed. In 2016, it was higher. There were more cases, and there were more infractions. And the number of misdemeanors has increased in 2018, and the number of infractions has declined. So that made your court costs go up with fewer cases. And then to detain an inmate for an average of 8.1 days for a misdemeanor, the cost, I didn't have the financial information available for 2016, but the current cost is about $1,700. So net cost is a little bit different animal. Net cost is looking at the revenues that are collected on behalf of the court and deducting those, their offsetting revenues from the costs. So it's what the general fund has to support, basically, at the end of the day. And you can see there that because some portions of the criminal justice system have decreased in their cost over time, that the overall costs for criminal justice per case have declined a little bit between 2016 and today. And that's primarily due to the fact that you have increased the number of misdemeanors. And some of the costs are fixed. So you're producing more units, you're processing more cases with the same number of people, for example, as that caseload goes up.
So this is our next break point, if there are some questions here.
I have one. Oh, whoa. Sorry about that. So fellometers, I know that was kind of a big term that we learned a few years back, and we thought that the cost per unit would increase because those were a lot more complicated cases for us to take on. Is this kind of saying that that didn't really happen? Or I guess when you just overall those fellometers in with everything else, I'm looking at the city attorney. I don't know if that's the right person to bug.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, excuse me, what was looked at in the study, but I do know that as they noted, the amount of possession of drug paraphernalia cases is significantly higher than the statewide average. And that's because of the charging standards from the county prosecutor's offices. We are unable to charge them as felonies. So oftentimes when people are in possession of felony narcotics, they're also in possession of the paraphernalia to inject them or to use them. And so because we're not able to charge them as felonies, we've proceeded with charging with the possession of drug paraphernalia so that there's some accountability for the crime.
And I recall that was a direction of council. Like we talked about that as a council with the city attorney at the time, or it was you. I think you were the city attorney then.
I don't know if council can give me direction in terms of prosecution.
Well, I think it was more, it wasn't to direct you how to prosecute. It was more about directing that we didn't want to see the felonies just go unattended to.
I understand, yes.
Okay.
I believe that was a conversation we had, yes.
Okay, just so most of us weren't here at the time. Okay.
All right.
Is there any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some specific characteristics of Bothell that are interesting in the context of this issue. Again, 72% of the defendants are not Bothell residents. You have a relatively low level of indigent defendants, which means you have slightly less reliance on the public defender. You have the usual smattering of need for interpreters. The court is in session about 12 hours per week. The youth court meets once a month, and they processed 24 cases last year. There were 15 jury trials last year, and about 3/4 of the police's criminal cases are misdemeanors that you will process as opposed to felonies going to the Superior Court. And then this last data point is kind of interesting. When we think about, you might have heard the term frequent flyers, people that show up again and again and again in the court system, and how you define those may vary. But we said, well, how many people are coming back in who have had 7 or more cases in the last 3 years? And with a stat like 21%, there are some strategies that might be interesting to consider to sort of focus on what are there interventions we could do that would be more successful than seeing this person again and again and again in our court system. We've noted the different caseload. You can see the comparison of your top charges between what's going on in other courts. Your revenue collection is relatively low, considering that you have a relatively low level of indigence, and your misdemeanor revenue collection is comparatively low as well. If you think about the overall system, the jail is your biggest single cost component in your criminal justice system. You're spending about $1.4 million a year on jail costs, and about 1/3 of that is to fund police officer, PSOs, to transport defendants between those jails and between the jails and the court. The court is not fully set up for video appearance, and the jails that you're currently using do have the video appearance, but has been some problems in being able to use it. That is one way to limit the number of transports you have to do. You could have the folks show up in jail and be videoed into the courtroom. You have a relatively high number of folks in jail. Your average daily population was just over 19 persons per day this year, and I know now it varies widely. Kirkland's ADP last year was much higher, but they operate their own jail. They're paying for that whether it's full or not, so they may have a different incentive structure than others. But a city like Bellevue, with at least I think 3 times your population, has only slightly more of an ADP. And so they're aggressively deploying different diversion strategies and aggressively managing their jail costs, which is a choice. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I'm just saying it's a choice that people make. The city does have a relatively low use of diversions like SCRAM and EHD or work crew or day reporting. Efficiency measure. When we look at the number of hearings to process a case, the Bothell Municipal Court has one of the lowest numbers around. That suggests that they're pretty efficient in processing cases. They also, though, on this less exciting side of things, they have a pretty high failure to appear rate, which means people got to come back again. So the case it's not getting processed as expeditiously because people are not coming. Deferred prosecution rates are low. Again, that increases your workload. You are contracting with Judge Gelson for the maximum number of part-time hours. That's 34 hours per week. If her workload grows above that level, she would need to be considered a full-time judge, and you need to have then conduct an election at the next judicial election date, which is November of 2022. To fill a full-time elected position there. And again, the police officers could significantly change what you're seeing in terms of the nature of the caseload and the size of the caseload. Before I go on, any questions about? Okay. So now we're starting to get into the 6 criteria and how the options compared. And the first one is cost, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ann.
So a significant part of the cost is looking at the net cost, associated services, which means looking at the full range of criminal justice interactive parts. In order to look at what the impact of costs will be in the future, we have to make some assumptions about caseload. So we had to do some projections about what might happen with your caseload. So you can compare the 3 options into the future. And so we made an attempt to look at all 3 of these facets in evaluating the net cost. So the first component I'm going to talk about is the caseload. This was probably the most difficult caseload projection that I've done in doing these court studies, and that's because Bothell right now has a lot of moving parts. So you've got some population changes, which has been true for Bothell for quite a long time. You have the public safety levy, which will add staffing to the police department. And then you have factors related to how those police officers are being deployed. So for the last 3 years, it's been difficult to fill police officer positions. And so the traffic officers have been reassigned to regular patrol in many cases. And so the enforcement of infractions, traffic infractions, has gone down. So we tried to look at what would happen with different different staffing patterns, as well as adding staff and population growth. So these three lines show a low, moderate, and high case. So we made 3 different sets of assumptions to give you a little bit of a range. So if you make certain assumptions, you would get a lower case forecast. And if you make different assumptions, you would get a higher case forecast. Because it's going to be very hard to predict exactly what's going to happen in the not too distant future. Okay, so the second factor that we looked at was how much it would cost the city to purchase court services from 2 different entities, contract with King County along with other cities in King County, or contract with a municipal court. And we used Kirkland as an example. It's not the only municipal court you could contract with, but we use them as an example, partly because they're close to you, and also because they have done contracting before, and they have contract cities now. So it's a pooled court right now. So for this kind of baseline look at a cost comparison, we used the current caseload, and we compared the cost of the court, probation, prosecutor, and public defense for kind of a total look at court and associated services. And then we also looked at it from a net cost perspective, or projected out revenue based on the same caseload. So here you can see that the cost of the Bothell Municipal Court is $1.8 million roughly when you add all of those components together and include facility and technology charges that have been pooled in the city's budget, and distribute those kind of at a pro rata share to these particular services. If you contract with a municipal court, in this case example, it would be Kirkland. They priced what they would charge under their pricing method for our size, for Bothell's current size caseload, came out $1.2 million. And then if you contracted with King County under the current King County contract, which is in the process of being renegotiated, so this is under the current contract model, it would cost about $1.4 million. You are seeing 0 in probation there because under the King County contract and under the Kirkland contract, the service is offered, but that service is paid for by retaining probation fees. So they don't charge anything for this service, but they retain fees that are collected from the people that use the probation service. So you'll see that both for the probation line for those 2 contractors and also for the probation fee line. So net cost-wise, municipal court comes out about $1.3 million, Kirkland just under $1 million, and King County just over $1 million.
Questions on this before we go? Yeah, Councilmember Zorns.
Who pays for probation?
Who pays for probation?
Right.
Currently?
Right, well, you're saying that the municipal court and King County Court wouldn't charge probation that comes out of?
Fees that the probationers pay. So if you're sentenced to probation for a misdemeanor, you're paying for it.
I'm paying for it. And they do the collections for it?
And they collect it.
Okay, thank you.
From those that are sentenced to probation.
Okay.
For a misdemeanor.
Learned something, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, you had a question?
Yes, I'm wondering, so one of the things that's come up in the past is the potential cost of our officers having to go to court appearances in other locations and the time that would take. So I'm wondering, is the cost of that impact included in these numbers?
The short answer is no. The more complex answer is that there are practices and mitigations for those costs that could be negotiated in either contract that would minimize them.
And do we know how frequently that's an issue? Like,
Yes, we're going to talk about that in one of the other 6 criteria
Perfect. Thank you.
specifically. Okay?
okay.
Councilmember Agnew.
You were saying that the King County Court, right now, they have their current contract. When is their new contract coming up, and do we know what that's going to be like?
The current contract runs through the end of 2021, and they'll start renegotiating that in the next 12 months. They'll start working on that as our expectation. They haven't identified their negotiating team from the county side of things yet. But from talking to multiple folks on both sides of that contract now, everybody seems to be very happy with the contract, and they are actually not anticipating dramatic changes to the contract. But that's what they're saying now. That could change.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is surrounding the total revenue, offsetting revenue. So if I'm reading that correctly, right now, we currently would collect on the 1,799,765, we'd collect the 454.99. Am I reading that correctly? If we were to go to a Kirkland and or a King County, we're only going to collect. How do we generate the revenue for 297,060?
The fees and fines are still Bothell's because they're Bothell cases. So those fees and fines that are showing there are still the infraction and misdemeanor fees and fines. It's only the probation costs that are being retained by the 2 contractors. The probation fees, I'm sorry. They're being paid by the probationers.
So regardless of scenario, we're looking at over $1 million or roughly $1 million
in net
to the city?
costs.
Okay, thank you.
City Attorney, did you want to add to that?
All I was going to say is that when someone is prosecuted for a misdemeanor, the judge will sentence them to up to 364 days in jail and up to a $5,000 fine. So for example, if I committed a theft and I would be sentenced to 364 days in jail with 359 suspended, leaving me 5 days to serve, a $5,000 fine with 4,750 suspended, leaving me $250 to pay plus the court costs and assessments. And I believe that's where the total of the 297 comes in.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
Thank you. I think what's interesting is that 72% of the people who are in our court system do not live in Bothell. So if we went to a municipal court or to a King County, we would still incur those costs for those people who are offended?
Yes.
They committed offenses in Bothell.
In Bothell,
and
okay.
the citation was issued by the
I got you.
Bothell Police.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to go on to the net cost?
All right.
So another way we looked at this issue is to look at the unit costs. So this is again that same unit cost excuse me, same unit cost calculation that we looked at before for just Bothell, and the Bothell column is the same numbers that you saw before, compared to if you did a contract with the municipal court contract option with Kirkland or with the King County contract, using 2018 numbers and caseload. So for the actual net cost, you're looking at around $1,300 per case for the municipal court, and then just a little over $900 with the King County, with the Kirkland contract, and almost $1,000 with the King County. Okay, so another, the next couple of slides here talk about the assumptions that were used when we tried to, in the forecast that we did of what it would look like into the future, what your cost scenario would look like and revenue scenario would look like into the future. So we did a low estimate, a medium estimate, and a high estimate to give a range, given that there were so many variables in your case forecast. So this is not the full list of assumptions. If you want to see the full list, you'll need to look at the report. But these are the key ones. So we looked at population growth, and for the 3 different forecasts, there's different levels of population growth, including annexation population, different levels of misdemeanor filings, some following the historical decline in misdemeanors, and some of the options involve actual growth in the number of misdemeanor filings. And then policing emphasis patrols, how many that patrol system or emphasis system might add to the caseload. And then police staffing of the traffic unit and patrol, how that might affect the caseload. Whether or not, how the judge changes, whether you stay with the part-time judge or add a commissioner in the medium estimate or go to a full-time judge with a commissioner in the high estimate to handle increased caseload. The number of indigent cases remains the same in this set of assumptions, and the facilities remain the same except in the high estimate, where we assumed that you would add a second courtroom, which has a capital investment cost. Okay, so what we did is, using those assumptions then, we tried to develop for you a forecast of what your costs would look like under the current contract scenarios that we just described, which in reality won't be the case, but
So it's just the municipal
it's for the municipal court. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, so it is. So I'm ahead of myself. So this is looking at what would happen to the municipal court under the 3 caseload scenarios. So the first scenario in constant dollars is the low forecast. The second one is the moderate forecast, and then the high forecast, all in 2026. And this again is the municipal court and the associated costs, and gives you an idea of what happens with these different sets of assumptions and therefore different staffing levels. So in 2026, what is projected for the low forecast is 1.8 million, very similar, you've heard that number before, very similar to today. The moderate forecast goes up to a little over 2 million, and the high forecast goes up to 2.7. So this reflects the caseload changes. So what's happening is your infraction caseload is increasing, and your misdemeanors might be going up or down depending on the assumption. Offsetting revenue changes quite a bit, and this is a big factor here because you are adding a lot of infractions, and that will change a great deal of your revenue forecast. So net cost-wise, the low forecast comes out about $1 million, which is less than today. 1.1 for the moderate and 1.6 in net cost for the high forecast.
This sort of harkens back to talking about how you're at an interesting juncture because so many things are in play. That's a really large swing in just 7 years, depending on the assumptions that you make in terms of what will be happening with your caseload, which depends on really how you're deploying your police officers. Okay. Obviously, this is a forecast, and it's going to not, reality will be different than that. Yeah, Paul?
I think this might be a good time to extend the meeting.
Make a motion to extend the meeting to 9:30?
It's been moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember McNeil to move, extend the meeting until 9:30. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, so again, we see a big range in the forecast. You don't usually see forecasts with this wide of a swing in 6 years for the reasons we talked about. Things that are beyond your control, the economy, those are held constant in all these scenarios, but there are some things that are within your control, and those were some of the things we highlighted. We did not do a forecast of what would happen in 6 years if you were with Kirkland or if you were with King County, because that just gets to be too many variables. They all have multiple clients whose caseloads are all going to be doing weird things in the same time period. You could not ever isolate out, and of course their caseload impacts the cost for everybody under those other scenarios. So you can't really isolate out what your costs are going to be under those other scenarios. We could just really try to provide you a sort of a scenario under the municipal court going forward 6 or 7 years. Okay? Yeah.
I have a question for you. So your second bullet there,
Yeah.
this is kind of how we got onto this whole discussion in the first place, is the possible construction of a second courtroom. So that wasn't included into this analysis at all, like the capital or financing the capital costs?
It is in the high scenario.
Is it?
It was included. Let's go back
Yeah,
a
we'll
slide.
back up a couple. There, you can see the bottom row. The high estimate includes, based on that study you did, that the city would invest $4 million and change to construct a second courtroom. And that is one of the major cost drivers in the high scenario as compared to the medium scenario.
And that 4.2 million was in 218 construction costs?
Yes, and then we parsed that out, a 20-year debt service payment, and added, we had to develop the annual increment.
Do we think 4.2 million as a 2018 cost would actually be correct for when we'd build it, which would be 2021 probably, the
Yeah,
soonest?
this is all constant dollars, so
Yeah,
it
it is.
doesn't
Okay.
include any inflation. None of these numbers include inflation of any sort.
But it was also an estimate. It was done at the time that the council was looking at the bond and levy. And so we had a very short period of time to put those estimates together. And so it was an estimate based on, what do you think you might need? Because if there was an opportunity to include some capital improvements in the bond issuance, we wanted the council to have that option, and you reviewed that and did include it in the bond. So it's not it's not a solid, we didn't do a full assessment, we didn't look at it, we didn't look at caseload. The court just, in a short period of time, did the best it could to provide the council with a potential option for making improvements at the court.
Oh, okay, so we don't even know how much that actually would cost to build the additional court. Okay, thanks.
All right. I think, any other cost questions before we move on to the next? This is the most data-heavy one, the one we just went through. So hopefully we'll be speeding through a little bit of this a little bit more going forward. Okay, service levels. At the highest level, the courts under any of these options are going to give you basically, provide you the same services. The biggest difference is that if you are contracting with another city, the voters of Bothell will never have an opportunity to participate in the selection of that judge. Right now, the judge is selected by the city administration because it's a part-time judge. But in the future, if your caseload grows to the point that you need a full-time judge, under the municipal court structure, obviously the voters of Bothell would have an opportunity to select that judge. If you go to the district court, the boundaries of the district court division would be redrawn to include all of Bothell, including the part in Snohomish County, and the voters of Bothell would have an opportunity to vote on the entire slate of district court judges in the Eastern Division, as they currently do for the King County voters, but not the voters of Bothell who reside in Snohomish County. So at the highest level, that's sort of what you're looking at as a distinction between these three options. You're going to get this, sorry, yes, go ahead.
I don't know if you're going to get to this later, though. If people in Snohomish County, or you broke the law in Bothell in Snohomish County, can we have a King County judge hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. For example, Auburn is in Pierce County and King County. They are a district court city. And there's a process you go through to adjust the boundary lines, and you have to draw your jury pools from different places depending on the defendant, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay.
And Bothell, for many years, was, all of Bothell, including the Snohomish County part, was part of the King County District Court system already.
They
It's
only,
just
yeah,
recently changed it back, and now they're going, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that, but.
they did. Okay. So the court offerings are pretty much similar. The main difference is in the specialty courts that are available. And all three of the courts, Kirkland and Redmond and Bothell, do have a youth traffic court. The trappings and processes in those traffic courts are different as between the different cities. The district court has a community court, which is basically you take folks out of the court building and you adjudicate in a really informal setting, and then you hook them up with services that can assist them with whatever their particular situation is. The folks in Redmond are very excited about their particular community court. We did talk to Judge Gelson about her interest in potentially starting a community court here for Bothell. You can, under any scenario, have cases referred to the county specialty courts. The Veterans Court and the Mental Health Court are both open to misdemeanor offenders. It's just a choice of the prosecutor to forward those cases to those specialty courts.
And the city is not charged extra for doing that.
The district court has a special relicensing program. Lots of people end up collecting fines in many, many courts, and they have and relicensing challenges and fees and penalties associated with not having a license, and they have a program that consolidates those, and you can also mitigate them. There's a consolidation program that the Bothell court participates in that does not allow you to sort of mitigate down the payments that you own, but you can at least consolidate them, so that's helpful. Again, the probation services are provided at no cost, but those tend to be money winners because the probation fees charged to the clients tend to exceed the cost of providing the probation services. You see different levels of digitized records in the different courts. That's at a high level. That's it for different court offerings. Moving along, service levels, similar hours of operation. Kirkland's court, and here's where we get to some of the travel, different distances. Kirkland is closer, 5.4 miles. Redmond's about 9 to 10 miles. Bus access is pretty bad trying to get from Bothell to Redmond. It's a long slog, and depending on traffic, you all know how bad it could take you to get to Redmond from here or vice versa. So that's definitely a consideration. Most of the folks that, as we said, since they're not necessarily Bothell residents, and most Bothell residents also work outside of the city, most of the people that are being asked to come to the court are probably going to be at work during the day, theoretically, and would be coming from work rather than from their Bothell residence to go to court. Not everybody, but the majority of folks. This is something we mentioned earlier. The municipal court has a very low number of hearings per case, which is an evidence of an effective and efficient processing of the cases. Interesting to see that you're a little bit lower than the average for the number of traffic infractions that say, that's it, I'm not paying this ticket, I want to talk to a judge. Interesting that Kirkland has almost half of their traffic infractions go in front of a judge. Those are feisty folks getting those tickets down there in Kirkland. Service levels online. The city does not have an ability to pay, to mitigate or contest tickets online, but Kirkland and King County both do. That's not a huge deal probably to institute that here, but it has not been instituted. Here's where we get into some of our secret shopper stuff. The assessment of the secret shopper, comparing the websites, we give them a preset list of questions. Try to answer this information by going to each of the websites and let us know what happened, right? Everybody was pretty much okay with all three websites, but they sort of liked the district court website the best. The on-site visits, well, the facilities, there's a lot of pictures of these facilities at the back of this slide deck, at the back of the report. They're very different facilities, but in terms of the experience that the secret shopper reported, it was like, I can deal with either. None of these seems particularly horrible or so much better. I never want to go back to the other facilities. We also had them call the court at 3 different set times. We had 3 different folks call each court 3 different times and figure out, so how is that customer service thing going? And here's some of the results from that. There were some good points and bad points at all 3 courts. This summarizes some of the things that they reported back to us. We tried to gather some sort of, how do you feel about getting your court services from this person or this other court? So here's some of the things that we heard from customers of the Kirkland court, some of the city customers, and here are some of the city customer comments from the King County court. So I'll just let you skate. Yeah.
I have one question. Would you go back 2 slides, because that was something about multiple languages, and it went really fast and I missed it. There it was.
Yeah.
So only the district court has multiple language options?
Yeah, you can like push one for, you know,
Right.
if you want Spanish or Thai or whatever it is that your languages, they have several options.
And currently Bothell has only one, which is Spanish, is that correct? Is that what I remember?
On the phone.
On the phone, no, I think they
No.
just have English.
Just English.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Going down the list of criteria, we looked at judicial outcomes, the issues of local control, and judicial philosophy. So here's your local control analysis at a high level. There is judicial importance is obviously important, and it's going to be present under any option, but your liability for what goes on differs whether if you are the operator of that facility, right? So if you maintain the court, your own municipal court, you control the budget, you control the facilities, you control the number of FTEs. You currently can select your part-time judge. The voters will select a full-time judge. The judge is going to be living in the city. Disadvantages, you have liability for what happens in that court if something goes wrong. Those are your employees, but you may not, because of the judicial independence, you don't have a high degree of oversight into how those employees are managed or trained. Once you have an elected judge, obviously that is not your choice anymore. The voters have made that choice for you. King County advantages, you have some control over your choice of judge under the King County contract currently. You can strike 2 judges. They'll say, these are the judges that will be hearing cases in Redmond, and you can pick up to 2 that you don't want to touch your cases and just say, that's nice, we just don't want Judge X or Y to hear that. So that's the extent of your control over the judges there. You don't obviously have liability responsibility for that operation because it is not yours, but on the same time, you don't have control over the budget or the staffing or the facility decisions. Fairly obvious. Kirkland, the same types of advantages of a lack of liability and responsibility for what's going on over there, but the city voters do not have a say in the choice of the judge, and that may be a significant consideration. In terms of how the judges approach their job, I'll let you scan this. I think we had good conversations with Judge Gelson and the other judges about how do they approach their job, and you can see some. This is a very qualitative type of an assessment. It's not quantitative. It was interesting when we met with all of the Redmond judges, and we met with the district court presiding judge, and the first words out of her mouth when I said, describe your judicial philosophy, were compassionate accountability. And it's that on that spectrum we talked about, just being way over on the what can we do to help these defendants get into a better place and not keep coming in and out of court. Okay, I'm just going to go forward because time's going on. Okay, this is just a little bit of information about the community court. People are excited about these as being sort of really ways to divert and get people back on track. This is some data points about that. But to set this up does take a tremendous amount of collaboration between the city and service providers and the court. So they haven't had it up for very long. The Redmond folks told us, well, we don't know if it's going to have a long-term difference in the trajectory of these people's lives, but they're very excited about the city staff and the judge that is managing this court are very excited about it and like to see it going on. There's a video link that you can watch some of the information about it if you're interested in what that's all about. All right, moving along. This is where we get to the police time.
Can we ask a question on that last slide there? Can you
Yes.
go back? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
You're moving on to a new topic I thought I'd ask.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in the restorative justice, and I'm wondering if you see any, we're obviously on kind of the other side of the spectrum, and I'm wondering if you see a reason for that. Is there some sort of challenge with our current system that would make it difficult to convert to that philosophy?
I think it's a mix of policy direction from the council that says we'd like to go there, and then you need to make the resources available to do it. And it is pretty an intensive collaborative exercise to actually set something like that up with all parts of the criminal justice system, but particularly the city administration and the court administration would need to be working together on setting that up and how it would come together.
Did you assess that relationship as it currently stands?
We did not.
Councilmember McCullough.
So again, restorative justice is something that we really want to move forward with. If we went with King County Community Court, we would be part of these resources. Would it cost us more dollars? It's just that the county has made these decisions.
And we did ask Kirkland whether they were going to be doing a community court, and they said, no, it's too expensive for us. We don't see that that's going to be something we would like to, but we just don't see that as a high priority given our resource challenges.
If you wanted to do community court here located in Bothell, King County was willing to talk about negotiating an opportunity for the literal court session to be held in the Bothell city limits, but that would cost you more money.
Okay. Impact on associated services. So if you decided to contract with a different court services provider, you're going to see similar court service offerings, except the community court would be available immediately if you went to the district court. The police can still find somebody to issue a warrant after hours. Under any of these scenarios, it is helpful to have a good working relationship between the various pieces and parts of the system, and we heard that from the customers of the other courts that we spoke to for sure. The public defenders that we spoke to that are working in all these courts were utterly indifferent about whether or not they were in this court or that court or the other court. They're like, we're fine, we can go anywhere. And you could choose to maintain your current probation operation under any scenario. So you don't have to use their probation. If you want to keep it, you can. And as I think the revenue picture showed, I think currently in 2018, the revenue from that operation more than covered the staffing costs for the one FTE and associated costs. Travel time, here we see, the police department did not have data on all the times that a police officer went to court. The data they did have was the number of times they were called to go over for a trial. And here's some of the information about the trials. So there may be other instances on a motions calendar or something else, or arraignments, or not arraignments, but other times that the police officers would go to court. We don't have data on that because the city does not keep it.
So on average, there's 1.25 trials held in a month, and 3 officers were called per month to attend those trials as witnesses generally.
So right now, of course, it's all Bothell all the time in your municipal court. And if you go to another court service provider, they would set up special calendars that were all Bothell cases at that time. So you would have preset calendars that your folks would know, okay, Wednesday morning at 10, I got to be there to hear this kind of thing. So you can get that under any scenario. And as both Kirkland and the district court folks said that if this was something that was important to you, they were open to negotiating, conducting Bothell court calendars in Bothell. You would have to provide a facility for them, and they would charge you extra for the, getting back and forth, but they were willing to do that if that was something that was very important to the city. One of the things that would be different as well is that if you went with King County in particular, they use video appearances a lot, which would immediately, potentially, depending on where you have your folks housed in jail, give you the opportunity to reduce those transport costs. Yeah. Okay. So Kirkland, the trifecta is to have a jail right next to your court so that you aren't schlepping people all over hither and yon to, as we said, a third of your jail costs are in transporting people back and forth. So if you were able to contract with Kirkland for jail services and also for court services, you would have a big money-saving opportunity there for you. Unfortunately, Kirkland's administration has said we're really not interested in doing a contract for jail services. You would have immediate access to the community court if you went with district court, and the in-city services we talked about. And obviously, if you go somewhere else, you have that space across the street. If you decided that there was a more important use for it, you would have that option available to you. Last one, we just wanted a note about transition. If you are going to change providers, you'd have to negotiate a contract with them. The district court contracts are sort of negotiated en masse by all of the client cities. They're a team and they negotiate together, but they can also negotiate for different types of things. For example, Bothell does it, Bellevue does its own probation services, and most of the district court cities get their probation services from the county. So there are variations that you can still negotiate for, but it's a big team negotiation that's happening. Here's a timeline. We chatted about that briefly before. If you're going to the county, you'll also need, there's a process that they have to go through to change the boundary maps to get all of Bothell back into the Eastern Division. When we talked to the county judges, they were, we described them here as being a very willing partner. I think this would be exciting to them to have Bothell again as a client city. I think Kirkland's position was we are always willing to talk to our fellow cities, but there would really have to be something in it for us, for the city of Kirkland. We don't know what that would be. So to our assessment was that they were not quite as excited about this idea as we seem to feel from the district court. Probably because they're going to be doing that new contract negotiation, it probably makes more sense to plan, if you're going to the county, not to do so before January 2022. You could probably go to Kirkland a little earlier because you don't have that whole giant, 30-party contract negotiation between you and the next year. So you could probably move a little bit earlier if you wanted to. If you do make a change, you're going to need to think about what you're going to do with your probation folks. Keep them or shift that to a different service provider. You'll have to consider the challenging issues of transitioning the existing personnel at the court, what you will do with the court facility in the future, and then, of course, there'll be some training involved in the new systems that any new court provider had. You may, in the interim, before you're able to make, if you decided you wanted to make a change, in between now and then, you could still see a big ramp up in your caseload, conceivably. That would mean you would have to have a full-time judge, and that would mean a change in the contract. The next judicial election is in 2022. But in between now and then, if her workload demanded a full-time judge, you would need to negotiate that with Judge Gelson. Couple facilities considerations. We do think that I think we mentioned there's only about 12 hours per week on average of court sessions over there, so there's definitely room to continue to stay in that one courtroom facility for quite some time. And we did anticipate the possibility of going to a second courtroom sooner in the high cost scenario, but that may or may not need to happen. You could also have this room here could be used for some types of court cases. And let's see here, there's more information about that. We talked about how there's space available because caseloads are declining. There's vacant courtrooms in Redmond. There are vacant courtrooms in the Kirkland facility. This is sort of our takeaway conclusions on the three options. These are not recommendations. These are just the assessments of the differences, the key differences between the three options that you have. I'm not going to,
Yeah, let's just go to the.
I'm just, so, risk, control, et cetera. And then we do have some recommendations that relate to near-term strategies under any scenario that you might want to consider. And we're going to talk a little bit about those just to close this out. The roadmap that we are recommending is to start by thinking, well, what is it that you've heard tonight, or the questions that are raised that is of most interest to you to pursue, or maybe of least interest? And then you may want to think about having more of an explicit conversation about your criminal justice policy approach. A lot of cities have an adopted policy document about their criminal justice approach. The city of Bothell does not have one. It's not something that you just like do in a couple weeks. It would be a significant chunk of work, but that may help you get, all on the same page about where you want to take this whole system and why. We do think that there should be some review of the tracking of court revenues and working with finance and the court, possibly the administrative office of the courts. We found a lot of discrepancies between what is being reported to the state and what is on the books in the city's finances. And the numbers that we've worked with, that Ann has shared with you tonight, are based on what's in the city's budget. And it may or may not be of concern that the AOC numbers are different, but in Ann's experiences, they were more different than she's used to seeing, and different in different ways each year. So, and maybe something worth checking in and saying, is there something going on here? Is it? And we have no basis for making any assessment of the why or about that.
Yeah, and during this 3-year window that we looked at most closely, you did change your city financial system, your software system and reporting system. So some of it may be related to that, which made it difficult to balance out the two.
Okay. We also think you may want to take advantage of this police space study that's underway before you make a decision to see, well, how big of a deal is it that the police are looking at needing additional space, and is that the right space for them to go to, or is there something different? Here's a list of some of the recommendations. You want to talk about these strategies, Ann? This is our closing 2 slides here.
Yeah. So some of the things that you can do to impact the caseload, which would have an impact, obviously, on your overall costs going out to 2026. In other words, keep you more on the low estimate than the high estimate. Include using some evidence-based programs or more evidence-based programs. There is at least one in place right now. Exploring the use of the court commissioner to handle infractions. Exploring doing some more diversion than is being currently done. And maybe doing some copying some things that other courts are doing to remind people to come to court, to increase the number of people that are reporting and not skipping their court dates, which increases workload. Those kinds of things are strategies that you could explore to manage your caseload. And then the second item is looking at practices that could decrease your costs or increase offsetting revenue. There are practices in courts, particularly in Western Washington, that are used to increase the cost recovery for court expenses and make that more responsibility of the misdemeanor in particular.
2 notes on that. We're not talking about changing what the judge decides to do, just changing how effectively we recover the fines and fees that she decides to impose.
And then there are bits of additional technology that could be used to decrease the cost of court operations. For example, online handling of some infractions rather than a person having to write and look at the mail at the staff end and that sort of thing. So there's some technology pieces that could be added to the system that's here now.
The court estimates, I thought this was interesting, that they're having to hand transcribe about 30% of the tickets that come over from the police because they're handwritten, they're not digitized. So they get to the court and the court typety-type, and then, so that's an extra
another
workflow.
example.
Yeah. Last slide.
So this slide deals with jail expenses and prisoner transport. So there's some strategies, and I'm not going to go through each individual ones because I see the council members' eyes are slowly getting lower and lower. But these are particular, no one in particular. Yeah. There are some specific strategies that you could employ and or explore using that would reduce your jail and detention costs.
This is how to track us down. And there's lots of other slides in the back here, who we visited, some of the data we used, more detail about your system, the court calendars, and then there's some fun pictures of the various courts, Kirkland's Court, and the county has got a much older facility out there in Redmond, but they have 4 courtrooms. And there's some more pictures up there. You can spot the consultant sitting in one of those.
Yeah.
So that concludes our report tonight. We're happy to take any last questions, and thank you for your patience. It's been a long presentation, I know.
Yeah.
I need a motion to extend the meeting. Not from Councilmember Agnew.
I move we extend the meeting to 9:45. 9:40.
Second.
It's moved by Councilmember, or Deputy Mayor, second by Councilmember McAuliffe to extend the meeting until 9:40. Any discussion on the motion? I doubt it. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Were you and I? Okay, passes unanimously. All right. So there's some questions up here. How many people have questions? All right, this is not going to take 20 minutes. Let's just go down the line. You want to go first, Councilmember Agnew?
I think one of the variables that we have here is that cost of the officers and the transportation of the prisoners. We don't know what those figures are yet at all. You know, and I know I couldn't make a decision until we came up with some figures that showed me a little. The other thing, I thought that night court for traffic infractions was a wonderful idea. So I did read it. And I'd like to see us go in that general direction.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that I really feel strongly about is that and I think it would reduce your costs as well, is to do more restorative justice system, and that's something we as a council should discuss what our abilities are. And then I think the accommodations, when I'm looking at for people with disabilities, I find that that it's just something that's really important that we look at as well as a city. And so it's an excellent report. It's going to take me a little while to go through it, but if we don't learn anything else, we'll learn how to improve our court system.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to reserve them for the late hour. I'm just going to go with a couple. So the key points that I picked up on were the 72% of the caseload is not Bothell residents specifically. I picked up on the transport is a big cost to the city, but through video conferencing, things like that we could mitigate some of those costs. Facilities, maintaining facilities is another big cost, capital improvement cost to the city. If we decide to build another facility and or house, also expanding police department and where the officer's going to go. So I've heard a lot of information. I did have an opportunity to read through the packet. I found it very interesting, the other cities that are actually contracting out their courts, some of the bigger cities like Bellevue. In Auburn, as an example, you said 2 different counties. So I think there's a lot of information here. I've had some time to read through the packet, but I think I'm going to have more questions related to this, so thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So one of the things that looked promising in terms of cost savings was the digitizing. Do we know the relative cost of that?
The digitizing of the tickets as they come over from police?
Well, I guess I didn't
Or are
know
you
specifically.
talking about technology in
Just
general?
technology in general,
All
yeah.
the court records.
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah. Of the three options you have, King County is uses technology the most. And Bothell uses it the least. So there are some incremental changes that Bothell could use that would reduce some of your costs without an entire case management software upgrade for the city, which would be an investment.
But we don't know.
No,
how much.
because that would be a pretty you'd have to price it out.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So you mentioned regarding community courts that you talked to Judge Gelson about her interest, but I didn't glean from that what her interest level was.
She expressed strong interest in doing a community court. At least that's how I interpreted what she said to us, that she would like to have that opportunity, and she believes in restorative justice approaches.
And then
that's borne out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
That's borne out by the probation division's recent adopting of one evidence-based program, which is more than many probation departments do in the lower courts. So they've already made a step in that direction.
Okay. And then my last question is, have there been staffing challenges within the court in terms of turnover or that sort of thing I don't get the sense that you assess too much the operations, because you said you weren't aware of the communications between the city and the court and how that might look and if it might work for the community.
We did ask some questions about turnover, and there have been changes in court administrator frequently and also in the court staff. It's a fairly high rate of change. It hasn't been as great the last 2 years.
Okay, and how does it compare to the rest of the city in terms of staff turnover?
It's more turnover than most other units in the city. In fact, I think all other units in the city.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Go for it.
Thank you very much for the report and the presentation tonight. I took away from it that we definitely learned some changes that we could make to our court no matter which direction we go, especially the technology and the video appearances, because it seems like the transport is such a huge part of it. And it sounds like a lot of the other courts are using the video appearances quite frequently, and I would think it would be beneficial for our municipal court to go down that path as well, especially if we stick with the municipal court. So thank you.
Councilmember Zorns.
I hope I can remember the things that were most meaningful for my head here. Did I understand that if we were to hire out to another court, contract out, that they could end the contract with a year's notice?
There is an asymmetry in a district court contract situation. A district court can get out of the contract faster than a city client can get out of the district court contract,
Okay.
and that's a matter of state statute. I think they had experienced cities jumping in and out, and that's really disruptive to the caseload, and what are the judges going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there is that asymmetry between how quickly you can get out of a district court contract.
So a city could be left in the lurch with a year to scramble and figure out how they were going to do their.
The current King County District Court contract does have, however, some notice provisions. So it would allow the city more time. You would know sooner than a year.
That would be in the contract?
Yes.
Okay. Then has there been any talk, because I noticed that both Kenmore and Woodinville contract out, have they talked about creating a court, their own courts?
Woodinville has recently contracted with Kirkland. The city of Kenmore just completed a study, and I'm not sure if it's been presented to the Kenmore City Council yet.
Okay.
So I'm a little reluctant to talk about that.
Talk about it.
But they are looking at whether the cost to them, the relative cost to them of being in the district court system versus being in another court scenario.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
It's a very high-level study, primarily focused on, are they paying more than other cities in relative cost?
Okay. Well, I tell you part of why I'm asking those questions is sitting here thinking about the population growth over time over the next 5-10 years, is that we could look at a very huge low demand on having a court system at this end of the lake, because Kirkland's the closest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I sit there and I think, well, is there a way for us to streamline here in Bothell to give us a buffer as our population and demands grow so that we can absorb, say, more traffic, and, you know, more traffic, but we've got another piece taken care of somewhere else. While I'll probably be dead by then, not really, but you know, in the next 5 years, council could be having a discussion of, do we want to take on building a new court building, or expanding a court building, and giving us that breathing window where we still have that system in place. We have a way of working and making it function, and this is what we need to serve this end of the lake. And then I complain a lot about nickel and diming, and you know, are we just, you know, frittering money away on little things? But I look at a court here as serving the people of Bothell. So if you are a victim and you're going to a court hearing, you could be working somewhere else and going, you know, East Side might not be it could be equally inconvenient.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a juror, you're going to be home coming here to report for duty. I mean, your day's shot. Anybody who's done jury duty knows your day is shot. So that's serving them.
Mm-hmm.
For traffic people, if you got your infraction here in Bothell, unless if you're here visiting, and I was joking with our city manager that Begin at Bothell had done its job, and so now, you know, people who are visiting are getting tickets. But for the most part, if you have a ticket here because you're a student coming through or you work here, coming into the court, it's right here. It's during your normal schedule. So I see it serving, you know, keeping things here serves people on a lot of different levels. And I appreciate, a couple things that I appreciate is, one, you talking about places where we have gaps and fine tuning and bringing it up so it makes our officers work more smoothly, because they have a lot of stuff that they have to process. Our court clerks being able to do their job, how can we make that easier for them? So I appreciate you identifying that. And one thing I just have to give you props for, you said early on, let me see, I wrote it down, that a court should not be a revenue maker. And I just wanted to thank you for making that statement. But those are my thoughts, and, you know, thank you for telling me kind of what's going on between Kenmore and Woodinville.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're down to 5 minutes, so I have some comments, but do you need direction tonight from the council? Do you want a direction on which option we want to explore further, or what would you like?
I just need direction in general. If you are interested in one or more of those options, if there's pieces in here, some of you started to list some things that you were interested in. I need some help with next steps. Do you want to do nothing for a period of time? What sort of are you interested in staff exploring? So the consultants have completed their contract. So whatever you direct us to do is currently not in the work plan. And so we would need to identify staff to work on it, a project plan, and obviously how we would work with the court to be able to do that. Because as the deputy mayor mentioned, there are some communication challenges with the court. And at this point, my city attorney is not allowed to have personal conversations, in-person conversations with the court administrator. And that's a huge challenge for me to be able to effectively discuss some of these programs. So I need some direction, and then need to figure out a process by which I could move forward.
Okay, I don't think that's going to take 4 minutes. So we need a motion to extend, or do you guys want to table this and ask for it to come back at a later meeting? Because some people look tired. I just want to give my 2 cents before, I think we're going to have to table this and do it at a later meeting. Thank you guys for coming, appreciate it. I'm interested in the district court. I think that finding out what the police study space needs are, I think is an important piece of that, as well as the cost of transporting or having police drive themselves to the district court. Doesn't look like it happens all that often, but I don't know. According to this report, though, it didn't sound like a big deal, but I'd like to know. I think that's about it. You know, just from the report, I think that was interesting, the different comparisons between the different courts and where they're at today. But it just seems to me that the biggest thing I heard is that the court cases are trending down. There's empty court cases in the district court. We're looking at trying to expand our court to provide the services here. So that to me alone is like a big red flag to try to figure out, like, how can we deliver this service to our community, and especially regionally. We have a bunch of empty courtrooms sitting around. We look like it just doesn't look good from a regional taxing standpoint. So those were my comments. Do you guys want to adjourn, or do you want to continue tonight? Where are we at?
Could I make, Mr. Mayor? I mean, I really think that we need a time for us to sit down as a group and discuss all of this so that we could bring something to the, for next steps. But I think without all of us being able to have a work session, I think, you know, it'd be difficult to get there without a work session. So I would suggest we might have one.
So more time to discuss this in a study session environment.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have room on our agenda for a study session in the next month?
No.
Oh, no, we don't.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No.
So we don't have time, unless you guys want to do an extra special meeting to discuss it.
Well, there's no time. I tried to schedule this on a separate evening to give you more time, but I couldn't. Between schedules and people being out of town, it was important that all 7 of you were here. We can't do it in August and July. You're dark in August, and that leads us into the fall, which is fine. That's when it would be scheduled.
All right, so is everybody okay with that? We'll table this until we can get it on the schedule. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved. Do I have a second? Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Recology. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Did you get the two opposed are Agnew and McNeil? We're adjourned.